Hey guys, tonight we slip behind the gilded lattice screens of Topkapi Palace, where the air in the year 1520 smells of rosewater, burning sandalwood, and just a hint of fear. You hear the shuffle of slippered feet on polished marble, the hushed giggles of young women who should be asleep, and the sharp clap of a mistress's hands to remind them who is really in charge. The harem is alive tonight. Its heartbeat is not the drums of Istanbul outside the palace walls, but the quieter, more dangerous rhythm of whispers, rivalries, and ambitions. You can almost taste the tension as new girls arrive from distant lands, some from Circassia with pale skin and wide eyes, others from Crimea, Greece, or the Balkans. Each one has been chosen not only for beauty, but for the possibility that she might one day give birth to a prince. And here's the reality check. You probably won't survive this. Not because of swords or plague, but because life inside the imperial harem is a battlefield in silk. One wrong word, one failed smile, one poorly timed cough near the wrong woman, and you could vanish from history as if you never existed. Before we wander further down these corridors of rivalry and ambition, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this with anyone curious about how concubines sometimes became queens. Post your location and your local time in the comments. I want to know from where and when you're peeking into the shadows of the Ottoman palace. And when the lights dim at the end of this tale, remember, in the harem, love was a weapon, jealousy was a poison, and queens were often born from the gamble of survival. Sweet dreams are optional here. You step inside the imperial harem, its foundations already laid by the time of Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople in 1453. But by the 16th century, when the great Suleiman takes the throne, it has swelled into the beating heart of Ottoman dynastic power. Forget the fantasy images of endless lounging and fountains. This was not just a pleasure chamber, it was a political machine, a fortress within a fortress. The harem was a city within a palace, with its own hierarchy, economy, and even guards. It wasn't just one big room of lounging concubines fanning themselves. There were courtyards, dormitories, classrooms, baths, kitchens, prayer halls, and audience chambers. Each section was walled off with barred gates and guarded by the eunuchs, black eunuchs from Sudan and Ethiopia, white eunuchs from the Balkans, men who had been chosen and altered precisely because they could never father children of their own. Their job was to keep order, to enforce rules, and to make sure no outsider so much as brushed against the silk sleeve of a concubine. You're walking now through the smaller gate at Topkapi that leads into the harem. The stone beneath your feet is cool and worn, smoothed by the passage of centuries of slippered feet. Ahead, the wooden lattice screens keep the women hidden, but allow them to look out. You can smell roasted lamb drifting from the kitchens, mixed with incense that clings to every carved wall panel. What was the purpose of this labyrinth of women, servants, and eunuchs? At its simplest, the harem was where the sultan's private life unfolded, but on a deeper level, it was where the very future of the Ottoman dynasty was manufactured. Every concubine inside was a potential mother of a prince. Every girl carried in from the markets of Tabriz or the slave routes of Crimea was an investment in bloodlines. You bend closer to the walls. The first thing to notice is that these women weren't prisoners in the way people often imagine. Yes, they were cut off from the outside world. Yes, they could not wander freely through the city, but inside these walls, they had access to luxuries most people could not dream of. Silk garments embroidered with gold, jewelry inlaid with pearls, and lessons from tutors in languages, calligraphy, music, and poetry. The idea was to take raw beauty from the provinces and polish it into cultured elegance, so that when the Sultan passed through, he was not just dazzled by a face, but by intelligence, wit, and charm. Now, here's the paradox. The harem was at once a cage and a ladder. For most girls, it was the end of the road. They would remain nameless attendants, washing, sewing, singing, and waiting in vain. But for a few, it was a path that could take them from absolute obscurity to the most powerful position in the empire, right beside the Sultan himself. And those foundations, the way the harem worked, were not uniquely Ottoman. They were drawn from centuries of Byzantine, Persian, and Islamic traditions. Emperors, shahs, and caliphs had all maintained women's quarters. The Ottomans, however, perfected the system into something both terrifying and extraordinary. Let's pause for a little modern aside. Imagine you're in your early teens, maybe 15, maybe younger, suddenly snatched from your home in the Caucasus, the Balkans, or even Italy. One day you're herding goats or spinning wool, the next you're being bathed, perfumed, and delivered into the palace of the most powerful man on earth. Netflix could never write a script with higher stakes. At first, the harem was more functional. During the early years of the empire, sultans often married princesses from neighboring dynasties, cementing alliances. But as Ottoman power grew, they decided they didn't need alliances. They needed control. So instead of marrying foreign princesses, who came with obligations, they turned to concubines. A concubine had no outside family power. Her loyalty was to the sultan alone. Any son she bore was pure Ottoman. This was genius-level dynastic engineering. By the time you walk past the first courtyard, you can see why the harem mattered. Every prince born here had a claim to the throne. Every woman inside was therefore a potential kingmaker. The foundations of the harem were political cement, binding together the empire's future one child at a time. But this also meant the walls hummed with danger. You don't need swords when a smile or a rumour can undo your rival. Even the architecture whispered control. The sultan's quarters sat beyond the layers of concubine dormitories, guarded by eunuchs. To reach him was to pass tests of loyalty and patience. To live here was to learn that beauty alone was not enough. You needed cunning, resilience, and luck. Sometimes, when the palace grew quiet in the long Istanbul nights, the concubines would gather in their chambers, whispering in a dozen languages. Some spoke Venetian, some Tatar, some Albanian. Together they created a strange, shifting mosaic of cultures under one roof. And yet, the foundation remained the same. You were property of the sultan, a piece in a game that could last a lifetime or end abruptly at dawn. Even the eunuchs, silent as shadows, knew which girl might rise and which one might fall. They passed messages, delivered notes, carried gifts. The foundation of the harem wasn't just stone and silk. It was networks of gossip and loyalty, as finely woven as any Persian carpet underfoot. So, as you stand here in the first courtyard, take a deep breath. You are at the threshold of a world that is both dazzling and dangerous. The harem's foundations were more than walls. They were the roots of an empire's dynasty, stretching invisibly through centuries of intrigue. And don't worry, we're just getting started. You step further into the labyrinth, past the marble columns that frame the first of many courtyards. Now comes the real beginning of harem life: recruitment. Nothing in this world was more carefully curated than the pipeline that brought young women into the Ottoman palace. Forget the romanticized idea of girls knocking on the palace door with flowers in their hair. This was a cold, calculated system of acquisition. Concubines came from all over the vast Ottoman domains, as well as territories beyond. Picture the empire at its height, stretching from Hungary to Iraq, from Yemen to North Africa. Now picture the constant stream of tribute flowing into Istanbul. Governors, vassals, and defeated princes sent gifts to the Sultan to prove their loyalty. Among the gifts were horses, jewels, spices, and women. Sometimes they were war captives, taken when Ottoman armies swept through the Balkans or the Caucasus. Sometimes they were purchased in the slave markets of Constantinople itself, where merchants displayed their human wares in quiet courtyards tucked just off the main streets. The most sought-after recruits were from Circassia, Georgia, and other Caucasian regions, prized for pale skin and delicate features. Venetian and Genoese traders were known to supply them. Others came from the Black Sea slave routes, where Tatars sold captives taken from raids. And don't imagine this was just a handful of girls each year. The system was organized. The palace eunuchs inspected new arrivals, rejecting those who did not meet the harem's strict physical standards or who appeared weak, ill, or unteachable. Your sandals tap against stone as you picture the journey. A girl might leave her mountain village in the Caucasus, be dragged in chains across steppe roads, then boarded onto a ship at the Crimean port of Kaffa. She'd hear the cry of gulls, the creak of ropes, the splash of waves against the hull. Weeks later, she'd see the domes and minarets of Constantinople glittering in the sun as she was marched through the city gates. For most, this was a terrifying end to one life. But for a rare few, it was the beginning of a destiny that would shape empires. Once inside, the first step was preparation. Think of it as onboarding. 16th century style, new recruits were bathed in scented waters, their hair washed with rose oil, their skin rubbed with henna, their old clothes were stripped away and replaced with palace silks. They were given new names, usually Turkish or Arabic, to cut ties with their pasts. An Albanian girl might become Ashe, a Greek girl might be renamed Fatma, a Circassian girl could emerge as Safiye. You lose your birth identity at the gate. The palace doesn't care who you were, only who you might become. Now here's the brutal part. Some never even made it past this stage. Too sickly? Back to the markets. Not pretty enough? Sent to less important households as servants. The palace was selective to the point of cruelty. Only the healthiest, brightest, and most promising girls were allowed to join the official ranks of the harem. Imagine standing in line with 20 others, waiting to be inspected by the chief eunuch, the Kizla Alisa. His eyes scan your face, your posture, the way you bow. Behind him, scribes note your age, your origin, your physical details. You try not to shake as he lifts your chin, checking your teeth like a horse trader. Your future narrows to this moment. Will you be dismissed as unworthy, or will you pass into the gilded world beyond? If you pass, congratulations. Though don't celebrate yet. You've just signed up for one of the most dangerous jobs in the empire. Your days now begin before dawn. Recruits wake in dormitories that smell of wax candles and clean linens, guarded by eunuchs who clang the iron rings at their belts. You stumble out of bed, splash water on your face, and tie your hair back. The first lessons begin immediately. Basic Turkish, the language of the court. Tutors drill you on phrases while your stomach growls for breakfast. Then comes etiquette. How to walk gracefully across marble floors without tripping. How to bow properly when a higher-ranked woman enters the room. How to smile without appearing too bold. Recruitment wasn't only about physical beauty. Palace officials searched for malleability. Could you adapt quickly? Could you be trained into a polished jewel of the court? Girls who were quick learners might advance rapidly, while others languished at the bottom of the hierarchy, performing menial tasks. The physical training was subtle but constant. Dancing was essential, not just for entertainment, but as a display of elegance. Music lessons followed, learning to play the oud or sing courtly songs. Calligraphy was introduced for those with a steady hand. Religion was woven into everything. Quran recitations, lessons in Islamic law, prayers 5 times daily. You had to learn not just to serve, but to embody Ottoman refinement. And yes, let's slip in a modern joke. Imagine your school curriculum, but instead of math, you get how to pour coffee gracefully without sloshing it on the future sultan. Instead of chemistry, it's how to read his mood by the twitch of his eyebrow, way more stressful than a pop quiz. But recruitment wasn't only about creating companions for the sultan. The palace also recruited girls to serve within the harem itself. Some would spend their entire lives as attendants, seamstresses, bath mistresses, or caretakers of the younger concubines. They weren't meant to catch the eye of the sultan, but their loyalty and service mattered. The harem needed dozens of roles filled, and not everyone could become a consort. Yet, hovering above all of this was the unspoken possibility. One day, the sultan might look your way, and if he did, your entire fate would shift. This hope kept many recruits awake at night, staring at the gilded ceilings, whispering to each other in the dark. Still, for everyone who dreamed of power, there were many who longed only for survival. After all, recruitment into the harem was not voluntary. These girls hadn't signed up for a glamorous life. Most had been torn from families, homes, and culture. Some never stopped mourning their lost identities. Imagine being a Venetian merchant's daughter, now forced to kneel in a foreign palace, singing hymns in a language you barely understand. The psychological shift was immense, yet slowly. As months passed, new recruits adapted. They bonded with one another in whispered conversations, sharing scraps of memory from their homelands. A Georgian might trade words with a Bosnian, each teaching the other fragments of their mother tongues. They braided each other's hair, stitched clothing together, passed secret notes. Friendships bloomed in the shadow of competition. Recruitment also came with the constant knowledge that the palace watched everything. The chief eunuch kept records. Senior women reported on younger ones. Rivalries began early, sometimes over something as small as who got the better seat in the bathhouse. That's the cruel irony. You're all on the same side, and yet you're each other's deadliest rivals. As the weeks turned to months, you realize the system was built to filter. Only the sharpest, most adaptable women survived the early recruitment years. They weren't just training you to serve, they were testing who among you had the resilience to one day wield influence. And in this way, the recruitment system wasn't just about filling a palace with pretty faces. It was a political factory, producing the future mothers of princes, the women who would one day stand toe-to-toe with viziers, foreign ambassadors, even the Sultan himself. By the time you've completed your first year inside, you've been transformed. The village girl is gone. In her place is a polished courtier in training, dressed in silk, hair scented with musk, eyes sharper than when you first stumbled through the palace gates. But don't relax, because recruitment was just the beginning. The real battles are still ahead. Training begins as soon as you've passed the initial inspection. No one wastes time, because every day you spend in the harem is either one step closer to obscurity or one tiny movement toward unimaginable power. You wake before sunrise, rubbing the sleep from your eyes as the faint glow of lanterns flickers across marble walls. The eunuchs pace outside the dormitories, rattling their iron belt rings like alarm bells. And then the day begins, the real shaping of raw recruits into polished jewels, fit for an empire. Your first lessons are in language. Turkish is compulsory, of course. It is the language of the Sultan, the court and the empire. A girl from the Balkans might struggle with the harsh consonants. A Circassian might whisper words over and over until her accent softens. Tutors are strict, quick to slap a wooden pointer across the floor to startle dozing students awake. The goal is fluency, not only to speak to the Sultan but to survive among rivals who can tear you down with a single phrase. Religion is woven into every corner of your new life. Quran lessons are taught daily, and though not all recruits were born Muslim, conversion is expected and immediate. You repeat verses until your tongue memorizes their rhythm. You learn not just prayers but the etiquette of piety, when to bow, when to cover your head, how to recite with beauty. For some, this faith becomes genuine comfort. For others, it is another layer of the mask you must wear to survive. Then comes etiquette, the fine art of moving, speaking, and existing in a way that pleases the eye of the palace. How to walk. Not too fast, not too slow, gliding as if your feet barely touch the marble. How to bow. Not so deep that you appear servile, not so shallow that you appear arrogant. How to smile. Faint, restrained, a hint of warmth, without boldness. You are trained like a dancer, every gesture rehearsed, every step measured. And yes, there is actual dancing. You learn the classical dances of Persia and the folk rhythms of Anatolia. You're taught to play the oud, the qanun, or the ney flute. Music fills the dormitories at night, not as entertainment but as practice. The Sultan's court demands performers, and you are trained to embody grace. Imagine hours spent plucking at strings until your fingertips ache, or spinning in circles until your head swims, all under the watchful eyes of senior concubines who note every stumble. Calligraphy lessons follow. You grip a reed pen and dip it into ink, tracing the elegant arcs of Arabic script. For many, this is the first time holding such tools. Mistakes earn stern corrections, but those who excel may find themselves recording poems, copying correspondence, or even composing their own verses. Poetry is currency in this world. Reciting a couplet at the right moment can catch a sultan's ear more effectively than jewels. Training also includes domestic arts. Don't let the silks fool you. Every concubine learns to sew, embroider, and weave. The harem is a self-sufficient household, and women are expected to maintain its splendor. You might spend hours bent over silk cloth, threading golden patterns into a robe destined for the sultan himself. Even this is a test. Fine needlework shows patience, steadiness, and devotion. The bathhouse is another classroom. You learn the rituals of bathing, not simply for cleanliness, but for beauty. Skin is scrubbed with pumice, hair is perfumed with rose water, teeth polished with miswak twigs. Recipes for cosmetic pastes are whispered between girls, powders for whitening the skin, kohl for darkening the eyes, henna for staining nails. And yes, here comes one of those strange historical details you'll remember. Some women applied a paste of crocodile dung as a facial treatment. Glamorous? No, but effective in creating the image of mystical allure, apparently. And you can't help but joke, nothing says date ready like reptile droppings smeared across your cheeks. Training is not only physical or artistic, it's psychological. From the start, you are taught silence, obedience, and secrecy. Gossip is everywhere, yet speaking too freely can ruin you. Senior concubines drill into you the art of saying much with little, how to suggest without speaking, how to imply without accusation, how to hide your thoughts behind a soft smile. You are, essentially, learning diplomacy in miniature. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or perhaps the lion on the throne, the Sultan. Though most concubines never so much as exchange a glance with him, all training is designed around that possibility. Every lesson is built on the idea that one day you might be called to his chambers. Your posture, your language, your song, all are rehearsals for that moment. At the same time, the training instills rivalry. You and the other recruits are constantly compared. Who learns Turkish fastest? Who dances most gracefully? Who has the steadiest hand in embroidery? Every success sets you above your peers. Every stumble feeds their whispers. You become hyper-aware of being observed, judged, ranked. Life becomes one long audition, but training has its softer sides too. In the long evenings, away from the tutor's eyes, girls whisper stories of home. A Greek might hum a village lullaby. A Georgian might teach others how to braid hair in her homeland style. Bonds form between recruits who share jokes, sneak food, or comfort each other during fevers. These friendships are lifelines. And yet everyone knows that tomorrow you may be rivals again. Senior concubines, the odalisques promoted to higher ranks, act as both teachers and gatekeepers. They correct mistakes harshly, but they also choose who gets noticed. If you curry favor with one, you might be recommended for more advanced training. If you cross one, your progress can stall forever. Imagine the terror of realizing that your future may depend on whether an older girl likes you or not. The palace eunuchs, too, play a role. Though feared, they are often the quiet observers, deciding which recruits are promising enough to be shown to higher authorities. They are the messengers, the facilitators. Their nod can make your path easier. Their silence can bury you in obscurity. Training lasts years. Some girls remain novices for decades, never rising beyond menial roles. Others move quickly, advancing through the ranks, catching the eyes of their supervisors. But the harem's training system ensures that everyone, whether destined for greatness or drudgery, emerges polished, refined, and utterly transformed from the frightened recruits who once stepped through the palace gates. By the time you've spent 2 years inside, you've forgotten much of your former life. You no longer walk like the girl who arrived trembling from a mountain village. You walk like a courtier, with measured grace. You no longer stumble over Turkish words. You speak them fluently, perhaps even adding flourishes of poetry. You can play an instrument, recite verses, embroider fine patterns, pour coffee flawlessly, and bow with elegance. But don't be fooled into thinking this is graduation. Training never ends in the harem. The goalposts keep shifting. Every new skill only leads to more expectations. You are constantly being prepared, not just for the possibility of pleasing the Sultan, but for navigating a world of rivalries that could decide life or death. The harem has its own memory. Fail once, and whispers will carry your mistake for years. Succeed brilliantly, and eyes will watch you with jealousy. It is in many ways the most competitive school in the empire. And here's the final joke for this section. In your old village, the scariest exam might have been reciting a prayer before the local priest. Here, the exam is whether you can balance a silver tray while bowing, smiling, and reciting a love poem. all while not spilling coffee on the silk carpet. Fail, and you'll wish it were just a red mark on a report card. So you keep training, day after day, learning to polish every word, every step, every glance. You are not just becoming a servant, you are being sculpted into a weapon, a potential queen in waiting. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize the truth. The harem is less a school of charm than a battlefield disguised in silk, and training is your armor. You've survived recruitment and years of training, and now you begin to see the deeper order of this hidden world. The harem isn't a shapeless collection of women. It is a ladder, each rung carefully measured, each step guarded. You are part of a hierarchy as rigid as the army outside the palace walls. And while the janissaries drill with spears in the courtyards of Istanbul, you and your sisters spar with glances, whispers, and alliances. The hierarchy inside the harem determines everything. Your work, your bed, your food, even whether the sultan might one day learn your name. At the very bottom are the novices. These are the newest recruits, the girls who still carry the accents of their homelands, who sometimes stumble over Turkish words or bow too quickly. Their duties are the most menial: cleaning, sewing, serving meals, preparing the bathhouse. They sleep in shared dormitories, their cots lined like soldiers' bunks, under the watchful eyes of older attendants. They live with the constant awareness that one mistake could send them back to obscurity, or worse, punishment. You remember your own novice days, scrubbing tiles in the baths until your hands wrinkled, carrying trays so heavy your shoulders ached, trying not to trip on the marble floors polished so slick they could break a bone. Above the novices are the odalisques. This is the first true promotion, the point where a girl begins to be considered more than a servant. Odalisques are taught finer skills: music, dance, embroidery of the highest quality. They attend upon the senior women, carrying cushions, serving sherbet, preparing cosmetics. The odalisques are constantly in view of their superiors, which is both a blessing and a curse. A slip of the tongue, a sour expression could mark you as insolent, but a graceful bow, a sweet song, or a well-timed compliment might be noticed. The next level is the gözde, literally the favorite. The gözde has caught someone's attention, perhaps the chief eunuchess, perhaps a senior consorts, perhaps even the sultans. She is not yet untouchable, but she is no longer anonymous. The gözde lives with a flickering candle of hope that she might one day be called to the sultan's chambers. This is where the competition sharpens. Among dozens of girls, only a handful ever become gözde, and once elevated, their every move is scrutinized. If you reach this level, you learn that favor is fragile. One day you're the pearl of the harem, the next you're yesterday's news, your place stolen by another girl with brighter eyes or a sharper wit. Above the gözde stands the iqbal, the woman who has not only caught the sultan's eye, but has shared his chambers. This is the turning point of a life. An iqbal is no longer merely a potential consort. She has proven herself in intimacy with the sovereign. She gains better rooms, finer clothes, attendants of her own. Her voice carries weight in the harem. Other women either curry her favor or plot her downfall. And here is the razor's edge. If an iqbal bears a child, especially a son, her status skyrockets. She becomes a kedin, one of the sultan's consorts. There may be several kedins at once, but each is a woman of immense power within the harem. The kedins command attendants, maintain their own apartments, and wield influence not only over the other women, but sometimes even over the sultan himself. Their sons are princes, shehzades, with claims to the throne. Every mother knows that her child's survival is her survival. The stakes have never been higher. Above all kadin stands the bosh kadin, the chief woman. This is the first among equals, the leading consort, often the sultan's most trusted partner. She does not merely compete with others, she governs them. The bosh kadin's word carries authority, and her favor can make or break a younger woman's career. If she dislikes you, you will never see the inside of the sultan's chambers. If she supports you, doors open. But towering above even the bosh kadin is the figure who truly dominates the hierarchy, the Valide Sultan, the sultan's mother. The Valide is the iron pillar of the harem, its governor, its judge, its queen in all but name. She controls the budget, supervises the eunuchs, oversees the recruitment of new girls, and often has a hand in political decisions beyond the harem walls. Her apartments are the grandest, her servants the most numerous. To be on her good side is to live comfortably, to cross her is to risk exile or death. You climb this ladder step by step, but you also learn to fear it. For every promotion upward, there is the possibility of a sudden fall. An Iqbal, who fails to conceive, may be demoted or ignored. A Kadin who angers the Valide may be reassigned to serve in a provincial palace, far from the heart of power. And the higher you rise, the more visible your enemies become. The hierarchy is reinforced in 1,000 tiny ways. Where you sleep, what you eat, the fabrics you wear, all are dictated by your rank. Novices wear plain cotton, favorites wear silk embroidered with gold, novices eat from wooden bowls, consorts dine off porcelain, even the baths are stratified. Lower-ranked girls must scrub the marble floors before the senior women arrive to lounge in perfumed waters. Every move is a lesson in status. You remember kneeling to serve sherbet at a feast, your arms trembling as you held the tray. The Ekabals sipped slowly, their jeweled fingers brushing the glass, while you prayed not to spill a drop. Later, when you rose to a dalisk, you felt a thrill as a novice bowed to you in the same way, and when you first glimpsed the Bashkadun sweeping through the corridor with her attendants, you understood that you were gazing at the pinnacle of female power in the empire. The hierarchy isn't static, it shifts constantly with the Sultan's favour. A girl can rise from novice to consort in a matter of years, if fortune smiles, or she can languish in obscurity forever. This creates a constant hum of tension. You can feel it in the air as you walk through the harem courtyards, the mix of envy, ambition, fear. Every girl glances sideways, measuring herself against her peers. Who is prettier? Who sings better? Who smiled at the eunuch in just the right way? And yes, let's slip in a joke here. It's basically Ottoman Idol, except instead of Simon Cowell, your judge is the most powerful man in the world, and instead of winning a recording contract, you might give birth to the next ruler of a vast empire. No pressure. The hierarchy also serves the state. By organizing the women in strict ranks, the palace ensures discipline and order. No one can simply rush into the Sultan's presence. Every approach is filtered through layers of authority. This prevents chaos, but it also creates opportunities for intrigue. If you want to reach the Sultan, you must first win over those above you, and they of course demand loyalty, gifts, flattery. Over time, you see the system for what it is, a carefully managed battlefield. The hierarchy prevents open rebellion, but it fosters constant low-level conflict. Whispers spread, alliances form, rivalries simmer. The harem is a place where power is never secure, where every smile hides calculation, where every bow may conceal resentment. And yet, within this strict hierarchy, there is also possibility. You remember the story of Harem Sultan, once a slave girl named Roxolana, who rose from novice to become the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent. She mastered the hierarchy, climbed every rung, and eventually stood equal to the Sultan himself. Such stories are whispered among the novices at night, their eyes wide with hope. If she could do it, perhaps you could too. So as you sit in the dormitory, sewing gold thread into silk, you know the truth. The hierarchy of the harem is not just a prison, it is also a ladder, and though most will never reach the top, the dream of climbing sustains you through the endless days of service, the whispered rivalries, the silent prayers. You glance at the lattice screens, wondering if the Sultan might ever look your way. For now, you are only a small figure in a vast hierarchy, but the possibility hangs in the air like incense. One day perhaps your rank will change. Your room will move closer to the heart of the palace. Your name will be whispered with awe. Until then, you climb, step by step, in a world where silk hides daggers and every smile may be sharpened by ambition. You've learnt the ranks, the rules and the rhythms, but everything in the harem revolves around one unpredictable event, the Sultan's choice. For all the years of training, for all the competition and hierarchy, it all comes down to this. At some point, perhaps when you least expect it, the ruler of one of the largest empires on earth may summon you. His glance, his gesture, his word, that is the lottery ticket of your life. The harem is structured precisely for this possibility. Concubines are trained not because every girl will meet the Sultan, but because any one of them might. When he decides, it is not casual. The Sultan doesn't wander the corridors at random like a careless tourist. Access is tightly controlled. The chief black eunuch, the Kızlar Agası, manages every approach. He alone oversees the women's movement into the Sultan's private apartments, and he is the one who informs a girl if her presence is requested. Now imagine the moment. You are sitting with other odalisques, embroidering a length of silk, when the eunuch appears. His expression is unreadable, as always. He speaks your name. The room still, the other girls glance at you, some with envy, some with pity, some with masks so carefully fixed you can't tell what they think. Your heart thuds in your chest. You stand, bow, and follow him down the marble corridor toward the Sultan's chambers. The ritual is deliberate. You are bathed first, your skin rubbed with rose water until it gleams. Your hair is combed and braided, perfumed with musk. You are dressed in a gown chosen by higher-ranking attendants, fitted in silks that shimmer in the lamplight. Jewelry is added, but not too much, a delicate balance between elegance and arrogance. A veil covers part of your face, not only for mystery but for humility. When you enter the Sultan's private rooms, the world narrows. The chamber is vast, domed ceilings painted with golden stars, the air heavy with incense. The Sultan reclines among cushions, surrounded not by a crowd but by silence. In this moment, the most powerful man alive sees you not as a servant, not as a trainee, but as a woman. He may speak to you, or he may simply observe. You bow deeply, your forehead brushing the carpet, and wait for his command. Here is where centuries of training are tested. Your walk must be graceful, your smile delicate, your words chosen with care. One misplaced glance, one foolish attempt at boldness, could send you back to obscurity forever. But if you succeed, if you charm him with wit, soothe him with music, delight him with poetry, your life changes in an instant. You move from being one of many to being one of the few. The Sultan's choice isn't just personal, it's political. His favorites shake the balance of power in the harem. A girl chosen once might be dismissed the next day, but a girl chosen repeatedly begins to accumulate influence. She becomes a gözde, a favorite, and others must bow to her new status. The chief eunuch notes her rising importance. The Valide Sultan watches her closely, deciding whether she is an ally or a threat. The other concubines measure her every move, waiting to imitate or sabotage. There's a cruel irony in this. While the Sultan is free to choose, the women must be chosen. No matter how brilliant, how beautiful, how ambitious, you cannot simply walk into his chambers. You must wait for the eunuch's summons. Your entire destiny hinges on the unpredictable desires of one man. And yet, the best concubines learn to influence even that. They cultivate allies among eunuchs, charm the valide, impress senior women who whisper in the right ears. The Sultan's choice may seem spontaneous, but it is often carefully guided. Sometimes the choice is shocking. History tells us of women who seemed insignificant, suddenly elevated overnight. One famous example is Harem, known as Roxolana, a red-haired girl from Ruthenia who rose to become Suleiman's legal wife. At first she was just another concubine among hundreds, but when the Sultan summoned her, something about her wit, her intelligence, her fire captured him. He called her again and again. Soon she became his constant companion, mother of his children, and the most powerful woman in the empire. Her rise shows how dangerous the Sultan's choice could be. Other women who had spent years cultivating their beauty and influence watched with envy as Roxolana leapt ahead of them. Rivalries sharpened, whispers spread. Some plotted to undermine her, but the Sultan's favor shielded her like a fortress. Once chosen, she became untouchable. This is why every girl in the harem lives in a state of anticipation. You never know when the eunuch will appear. Some wait decades and never hear their names. Others are summoned once and never again. A few, the luckiest or perhaps the cleverest, are chosen often enough to change history. The choice also comes with peril. If you displease the Sultan, your fall can be swift. A careless word, an ill-timed laugh, Even an unlucky illness could end your chances forever. Worse still, some women were accused of betrayal or sorcery if they lost favor suddenly. The harem was a nest of rumors, and every choice the sultan made sparked jealousy. One girl's rise was another's ruin. You remember one night when a fellow recruit was chosen. The dormitory buzzed with whispers after she left. Some girls sighed, hoping for their own turn. Others rolled their eyes, convinced she wouldn't last. Hours later, she returned, her hair disheveled, her cheeks flushed, her face unreadable. She never said a word about what passed in those chambers, but her silence spoke volumes. The next day, her bed was moved to a different room, closer to the center of the harem. She had risen. From then on, everything about her life changed. She received finer clothes, more attendants, richer meals. She no longer served others. She was served. She carried herself differently, with a quiet confidence that both impressed and irritated her peers, and within weeks, she became a focal point of gossip. Was she truly favored? Would she bear a child? Would she replace the Bashkadin? Every step she took was scrutinized. The Sultan's choice then is like lightning, sudden, dazzling, and destructive. It can illuminate one life while casting others into shadow. It can strike anywhere, without warning, and like lightning, it reshapes the landscape in its wake. You begin to realize that while the hierarchy is rigid, the Sultan's favor is the wild card that scrambles the rules. A novice today could be a queen tomorrow. An established Kadhan could be cast aside for a new face. Nothing is guaranteed. The only constant is the unpredictability of desire. And here's where a little modern aside sneaks in. Imagine your entire career, your entire future, depends on whether the CEO of your company notices you at a random meeting. No interviews, no promotions, no applications, just a glance. Welcome to Corporate Harem Life Ottoman Edition. Still, the system worked. For centuries, this was how dynasties were made. Sons were born from these unions, princes who would one day fight for the throne. Alliances shifted based on who the Sultan favored. The politics of empire often began in the quiet intimacy of the harem, and so you wait, like all the others. You polish your skills, perfect your bow, memorize your poems. You whisper prayers at night, hoping your name might be spoken, because the Sultan's choice is the key that unlocks the next level of power. Without it, you remain one of hundreds, your face fading into the background. With it, you might rise to stand beside the most powerful man on earth, shaping not only your own fate, but the fate of empires. Until that moment comes, you breathe the perfumed air of the harem, watching, waiting, learning, because here, every glance matters, every gesture counts, and every heartbeat could carry the sound of your name. The moment the Sultan's favor touches you, the air in the harem changes. You feel it in the way the other women fall silent when you pass, in the way novices scurry to make room for you, in the way even the eunuchs bow just a little deeper. This is the threshold where a woman shifts from being a mere ornament to a force that can shape the palace itself. At this level, you hear a new name whispered, Bashkadin, the chief consort, the woman who stands highest among the Sultan's companions. But first, let's trace the climb. After the Sultan chooses you more than once, you rise from Gozde, the favored one, to Iqbal, the fortunate. Once you bear him a child, especially a son, you become a Kadeen, and above the Kadeens, above the many consorts and companions, there is one who reigns as first among equals. She is the Bashkadeen, and when she speaks, the harem listens. The position is not declared lightly. It is often the result of years of careful maneuvering, charm, patience, and most importantly, the Sultan's consistent affection. To become Bashkadin is not just about being beautiful, it is about being indispensable. The Bashkadin knows how to soothe him when the viziers argue, how to distract him when his burdens weigh heavy, how to make herself the single constant in a world of shifting politics. The Bashkadin's apartments reflect her status. While ordinary concubines sleep in crowded dormitories, she lives in richly furnished chambers with carved wooden screens, thick Persian carpets, and attendants of her own. The air is perfumed with ambergris, her gowns are sewn with gold thread, and her table is set with delicacies the novices only glimpse when serving. Even her baths are private, with marble tubs filled with rose-scented water, while others make do with communal pools. Yet, the true power of the Bashkadin is not measured in jewels or silks. It is measured in influence. She sits closer to the Sultan's ear than even the viziers. In the quiet hours of night, while others sleep, she listens to him speak of campaigns and policies. Her suggestions may be subtle, wrapped in humor or affection, but they can tip decisions that affect millions. If she praises a governor, he may be promoted. If she casts doubt on a vizier, his career may falter, and if she names a rival in the harem, that rival may find herself packed off to a distant provincial palace. Every Bashkadin learns quickly that power invites enemies. The other Kadins resent her dominance. The Valide Sultan, the mother of the Sultan, may see her as a threat. The viziers may whisper against her influence. Even the eunuchs who serve her may quietly tally her mistakes. She must be endlessly careful. Her tone, her alliances, even her laughter are weapons or vulnerabilities, depending on how they are wielded. Picture a feast in the harem. The Bashkadin enters, her gown shimmering like liquid fire in the lamplight. She takes her seat at the highest cushion, while others sit lower. A novice pours sherbet for her first, bowing so low her forehead nearly touches the floor. The Bashkadin speaks little, but when she does, the others lean in, laughing too loudly at her jokes, nodding eagerly at her observations. Every gesture is theatre, every word a reminder of her supremacy. Yet beneath the surface, rivalry simmers. A younger Kadin, recently favoured by the Sultan, may glance with barely hidden defiance. Another may whisper to her attendants, plotting subtle sabotage. Poison in cosmetics, whispers in the Sultan's ear, alliances with eunuchs. Every Bashkadin knows these threats lurk behind the smiles. To survive, she must master vigilance. There are famous examples of Bashkadins who wielded immense power. Take Valide Sultan, who began as a concubine and rose to become both Bashkadin and later Valide Sultan. For decades, she shaped Ottoman politics, acting as regent for her sons and grandsons. Her story shows how the chief consort could extend her influence far beyond the harem walls, into the realm of armies and laws. But power also brings peril. Valide herself was strangled by silk cords in the harem, murdered by rivals who feared her dominance. The lesson is sharp. The harem rewards ambition, but it also punishes overreach. To remain Bashkadin, you must walk a line as thin as the embroidery threads you once held as a novice. The Bashkadin also oversees the inner hierarchy of the harem. She assigns duties, rewards loyalty, and disciplines disobedience. In this way, she is a governor within a kingdom, ruling over hundreds of women. The novices watch her like a constellation in the night sky, dreaming of one day shining as she does. The Kadins and Iqbals measure themselves against her, scheming to replace her. The eunuchs enforce her orders, but also report her every move to the Valide Sultan. She is surrounded by both admiration and danger. And here's where we slip in a lighter aside. Imagine being the office manager of the most competitive workplace in history, where every intern secretly wants your job, your boss is also your lover, and HR doesn't exist because grievances are settled with exile, poison, or silk cords. Congratulations, you're the Bashkadin. Beyond the palace walls, the Bashkadin's name is not unknown. Ambassadors whisper of her influence in letters sent back to Europe. Venetian envoys report how a certain consort has the ear of the Sultan, shaping his moods, perhaps even his policies. Foreign powers sometimes send gifts to her directly, knowing that pleasing her could mean favorable treatment in the empire's decisions. In this way, the Bashkadin is not just a private companion, she is a political actor in her own right. Her role is precarious, yet dazzling. For every Bashkadin who enjoyed decades of power, there are others who fell swiftly, replaced by rivals or undone by miscalculation. A careless insult, a misplaced alliance, even a single illness could topple her from the peak. Still, the position is coveted. Every girl in the harem dreams, in whispered conversations late at night, of being the one who wears that crown of influence. They imagine the silk gowns, the jeweled rings, the whispered deference of eunuchs. They picture themselves walking through the corridors while others bow low. They dream of being the sun around which the harem orbits. And so the cycle continues. Every time the sultan's gaze lingers on a woman, the others wonder, is this the new Bashkardin? Will she replace the old one? Rivalries spark, plots thicken, friendships strain. For while the harem is built on hierarchy, it is also built on change. Nothing is fixed forever, not even the throne of the chief consort. You, if you are fortunate enough to reach this height, must remember one truth. The Bashkardin is powerful only as long as the sultan's love endures. When his affection fades, so too does her protection. To keep her crown, she must remain both captivating and cautious, both brilliant and humble, both generous and merciless. And perhaps that is the true essence of this role. The Bashkardin is the embodiment of the harem's paradox. She is both a lover and a ruler, both vulnerable and untouchable, both queen and prisoner. Her life is one long balancing act, where every smile hides strategy, every whisper carries risk, and every night may bring either triumph or downfall. So as you sit on your cushion, watching the Bashkardin glide past with her entourage, you cannot help but wonder, will you ever stand where she stands? Will you ever taste that mixture of luxury and terror? Or will you remain one of the many who bow, serve, and dream, while someone else wears the crown of silk? For now, you take a deep breath and keep sewing gold into fabric. Keep learning your songs. Keep perfecting your bow. Because in the harem, the Bashkardin is not just a rank. She is a possibility, a shimmering mirage that keeps you walking forward through the endless corridors of rivalry and ambition. The story of Harem Sultan, Roxolana, as she was known in Europe, remains the clearest example of what could happen when the right woman, in the right place, captured not only the Sultan's gaze, but also his mind. Her rise was no accident of beauty alone. It was the collision of sharp intelligence, unrelenting willpower, and a ruler willing to defy centuries of tradition. She began as a girl from Ruthenia, likely born around 1502, captured in a Tatar raid and sold through the Crimean slave markets to Constantinople. By all accounts, she was not the most beautiful woman in the harem. Other concubines outshone her with more delicate features or stately grace, but Harem had something rarer: wit, charm, and an unshakable confidence. Where others bowed their heads, she lifted hers. Where others merely performed, she engaged. And when Sultan Suleiman first summoned her, she did not simply flatter, she conversed. From that first encounter, she distinguished herself by her laughter. The name Harem itself means the cheerful one, given to her because she smiled and laughed even in the rigid, watchful atmosphere of the harem. Imagine the contrast. Dozens of concubines, all trained to be quiet, modest, obedient, suddenly set against a girl who laughed freely at the Sultan's jokes and teased him gently about his serious nature. Where others treated him like a god, she treated him like a man. That difference, more than anything, captured him. Once Harem became a regular presence in Suleiman's chambers, her rivals began to take notice. She quickly rose from novice to Gozde, then to Iqbal, then to Qadim. But her rise sparked jealousy, especially from Mahadevran Sultan, Suleiman's longtime consort and mother of his eldest son, Mustafa. For years, Mahadevran had been the chief woman of the harem, secure in her position as mother of the heir apparent. Now suddenly, this red-haired girl threatened everything. The rivalry between Harem and Mahidevran became legendary. One account, whispered through the palace, tells of a fight in which Mahidevran struck Harem, leaving her bruised. Harem, clever as ever, turned the incident to her advantage. Instead of hiding her injuries, she presented herself to Suleiman, showing him the marks. The message was clear: his favorite had been attacked. The result was swift. Mahidevran fell from grace, while Harem's influence only deepened. But laughter and charm alone could not secure her position. Her harem understood the game better than anyone. Survival depended on bearing children, preferably sons. Over time, she gave Suleiman 6 children, 5 sons and a daughter, securing her dynasty within the dynasty. Each birth strengthened her hold. While Mahidevran was left with only Mustafa, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. Now here is where Harem broke centuries of tradition. Ottoman sultans did not marry their concubines. Marriage to foreign princesses had been abandoned generations earlier to avoid political entanglements, and concubines were kept as companions, not wives. But Suleiman loved Harem so deeply that he broke this rule. He married her, making her his legal wife, an unprecedented act that shocked the court and foreign ambassadors alike. Letters flew across Europe, marveling at the strange power this woman held. With marriage came legitimacy. Harem was no longer just a concubine, she was a sultana, the sultan's queen. Her apartments in Topkapi expanded, her attendants multiplied, her authority solidified. She no longer needed to bow before the Bashkirdin. She had become something greater, a partner to the sultan himself, and she did not waste her influence. Harem involved herself in state affairs, corresponding with foreign leaders, advising Suleiman on matters of governance, and sponsoring monumental charitable works. She commissioned mosques, schools, baths, and soup kitchens across the empire, not only in Constantinople but in Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina. These acts served two purposes. They displayed her piety and generosity, and they legitimized her position in the eyes of the public. A concubine might be dismissed as a usurper, but a queen who fed the poor and built mosques was harder to discredit. Still, her enemies did not vanish. The greatest threat to her power was Mustafa, Mahidevran's son, who remained the heir apparent. Suleiman adored him, and many in the court supported him as the next sultan. Harem, however, feared for her own sons. In the ruthless tradition of the Ottomans, succession was a blood sport. When one prince became sultan, his brothers were usually executed to prevent civil war. If Mustafa inherited the throne, Harem's sons, and perhaps Harem herself, would not survive. Thus began one of the darkest rivalries of the harem, one that spilled beyond its walls into the realm of politics and death. Harem and her allies, including the powerful vizier Rustam Pasha, whom she arranged to marry her daughter Mihrimah Sultan, worked tirelessly to undermine Mustafa's position. Whispers of treason spread, rumors that Mustafa was plotting against his father, that he was too ambitious, too independent. The climax came in 1553, during Suleiman's campaign in Anatolia. Mustafa was summoned to his father's tent. He entered, dressed in white, a symbol of his innocence, but he never emerged alive. Strangled with a bowstring, as was Ottoman custom, Mustafa's death shocked the empire. To this day, historians debate how much Harem's hand guided that tragedy. Was she the architect of the whispers that sealed his fate, or was she simply a mother desperate to protect her sons in a brutal system? Either way, her rival was eliminated, and her children stood as the future of the dynasty. The consequences were immense. With Mustafa gone, the path was clear for Harem's sons. Though most would die in their own succession struggles, her son Selim eventually became Selim II, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Through him, her bloodline continued on the throne for generations. Harem's story doesn't end with intrigue. She also left a cultural and architectural legacy that reshaped Istanbul. The Haseki Harem Sultan complex, a grand mosque and charitable foundation, still stands today. She funded public kitchens that fed the poor daily, a gesture remembered with gratitude by countless subjects. In Jerusalem, she built a soup kitchen that served thousands of meals, cementing her reputation as both powerful and pious. And here, allow a small modern aside. Imagine being born in a village, captured in war, sold as a slave, and ending your life as the queen of one of the largest empires on earth, with your name etched into the skyline of Istanbul. Talk about the ultimate rags to riches story. Disney could never. But what makes Harem truly remarkable is not just her personal rise, but the precedent she set. By marrying the Sultan, by involving herself in politics, by sponsoring monumental works, she redefined what it meant to be a woman in the harem. She transformed the role of concubine into something far closer to queen. After her, the idea that women of the harem could wield real power was no longer unthinkable. It was reality. Her life was not without tragedy. She died in 1558, before Suleiman himself, and was buried in a magnificent mausoleum near his own. Their tombs still stand side by side in Istanbul, a testament to a love story that defied tradition and reshaped empire. Yet her shadow lingered long after her death. The Sultanate of Women, a period when consorts and mothers of sultans wielded unprecedented power, began with her. Kazem Sultan, Turhan Sultan, and others would follow her path, ruling from behind the lattice screens with authority equal to viziers. When you hear the whispers of the harem today, when you walk through the silent corridors of Topkapi and feel the echoes of ambition, it is Hürrem's laughter you imagine. Cheerful, confident, dangerous. She was the embodiment of the harem's potential, proof that a concubine could become not only a queen but the architect of dynasties. And as you sit among the women, watching rivals maneuver and alliances shift, you know the truth. If Hürrem could do it, so could you. Perhaps you too might one day rise, not just to be favoured, but to rule in all but name. Until then, you wait, you watch, and you sharpen your smile into a weapon. Just as she did centuries ago, rivalries in the harem were as inevitable as the call to prayer, echoing over the domes of Constantinople. When dozens, sometimes hundreds of women were gathered together in silken captivity, all vying for the fleeting attention of one man, harmony was an illusion. You lived in a house built of whispers, and those whispers had teeth. Behind every embroidered cushion and perfumed bath lingered the scent of ambition. Alliances formed not because women liked each other, but because they needed protection. Enemies multiplied simply because someone smiled at the wrong moment, or because a rumor, true or false, stuck to you like smoke. The system encouraged rivalry. The Sultan could only favor so many women, and favor was the only currency that mattered. If you were passed over too long, your chances dwindled. Even if you rose to become an Iqbal or Kaidin, the threat never disappeared. A younger, fresher face could undo years of careful cultivation overnight. That tension turned every gathering into a contest. A feast wasn't about food, it was about who sat closest to the Sultan, who caught his eye when music filled the room, who offered a witty line at just the right moment. So women learned to form alliances. Sometimes these were practical, almost businesslike. Two odalisques might agree to protect one another from malicious gossip, sharing secrets but also keeping one another's reputations clean. A Kadin might cultivate friendships with eunuchs who carried messages to the Sultan, slipping them small gifts, rings, coins, embroidered kerchiefs in exchange for tidbits of information. Others tried to align themselves with the Valide Sultan, knowing her favour could shield them from rival attacks. But alliances could fracture as quickly as they formed. A friend today could become a rival tomorrow if the Sultan lingered a moment too long on your face instead of hers. The harem was less like a family and more like a battlefield disguised in silk and laughter. Spying was rampant. Attendants reported on conversations, eunuchs carried rumours, and even musicians or bath attendants might serve as informants. Every corridor had ears, every lattice screen could hide watching eyes. You learned to speak in half-truths, to smile while concealing your thoughts. Women often communicated through subtle gestures, an arched eyebrow, a carefully chosen gift, a sudden absence from a gathering. The politics of the harem were played in silence, as much as in words. Gifts were both weapons and shields. A jeweled bracelet given to the Bashkadin could signal loyalty, or bribe her to look the other way. A bolt of rare silk sent to another Kadin might be an attempt at reconciliation, or a calculated trap to make her appear greedy. Even food could be a dangerous offering. Rumours of poisoned sweets or tainted sherbet circulated often enough to make you hesitate before sipping. Sabotage was an art form. Rival women might slip coarse powders into a rival's cosmetics to mar her skin, or whisper suggestions to seamstresses to accidentally alter a rival's gown before a feast, making her appear clumsy or ill-dressed before the Sultan. A careless rumour she is sickly, her laughter is forced, the Sultan has grown tired of her, could spread through the harem like wildfire, impossible to disprove once tongues had carried it. And of course there was the most dangerous rivalry of all, motherhood. Once a concubine bore a son, she no longer competed only for affection, she competed for dynastic survival. The mothers of princes became locked in battles sharper than any duel. For when one prince ascended to the throne, his brothers were often executed to prevent civil war. Every mother knew the stakes. Protect your son at all costs, because if another prince inherited, your child and perhaps you would not live to see the dawn. This reality poisoned friendships. A woman might smile at another during the day, exchange gifts, even sit side by side in the baths. But in her heart, she knew that if their sons stood against each other, their bond meant nothing. The harem's rivalries were not just personal, they were dynastic, soaked in the blood of future battles. Consider again the rivalry between Harem Sultan and Mahidevran. It wasn't merely about two women competing for Sulayman's affection. It was about their sons, Mustafa on one side, Selim and his brothers on the other. Every laugh, every slight, every whisper had the weight of empire behind it. And when Mustafa fell, strangled by his father's order, it was more than the death of a prince. It was the culmination of years of rivalry inside the harem, a shadow war fought with whispers, plots, and calculated tears. But not all rivalries ended in blood. Sometimes they simmered, unresolved, stretching across decades. Kosem's Sultan, for example, clashed repeatedly with Turhan Sultan, her daughter-in-law, over control of the harem and guardianship of the young Mehmed III. Their rivalry split the palace into factions, eunuchs on one side, viziers on the other. In the end, it culminated in Kosem's murder by strangulation, proof that even the most powerful women could not escape the harem's cycle of jealousy and ambition. Still, rivalry wasn't always destructive. Paradoxically, it also made the harem dynamic. Women pushed themselves to be more skilled, more cultured, more politically astute. Rivalries forced innovation in music, poetry, dress, even charity. To outshine others, women funded new mosques, sponsored schools, organized festivals. In competing to prove themselves, they left legacies that shaped the empire itself. Sometimes, alliances between rivals even became the empire's strength. Mihrama Sultan, daughter of Harem, worked alongside her mother to consolidate power, blending their influence into a formidable front. The two women complemented each other. Harem with her cunning, Mihrama with her position as both princess and consort to Rustam Pasha, the Grand Vizier. Together they balanced rivalries by building an unbreakable partnership, showing that even in the cutthroat atmosphere of the harem, bonds could be forged that changed history. Daily life reflected these tensions. You might wake in the morning to find a rival has left a gift of fruit at your door. Do you eat it, or suspect poison? You might share a bath with women who smile at you while whispering insults in a language you only half understand. At night, you lie in your bed, listening to the faint sound of laughter drifting from another chamber, wondering if the Sultan is with her instead of you. And yes, let's slip in a lighter aside. If reality television had existed in the 16th century, the Ottoman harem would have been the highest-rated show on earth. Intrigue, alliances, betrayals, cliffhangers. It was Survivor, The Bachelor, and Game of Thrones all rolled into one, with silk cushions and sherbet for props. The rivalries extended beyond the walls of Topkapi. Foreign ambassadors often wrote home about which woman currently held the Sultan's attention and which rivals plotted against her. In Venice, Genoa, and Vienna, statesmen pored over these reports, knowing that the rivalry of two women in the harem could shift the balance of alliances, wars, and trade routes. The world understood what happened in the harem did not stay in the harem. Yet for all the gossip, for all the danger, life inside was not constant warfare. There were moments of real friendship, real laughter, real sisterhood. Women braided each other's hair, sang songs from their homelands, shared stories of childhood. Rivalries might cool, alliances might thaw, but the possibility of betrayal never disappeared. Trust was a rare and fragile thing, a flower growing in soil salted by ambition. So you move carefully, always. You smile when you must, laugh when it's expected, hold your tongue when silence is safer. You cultivate friends but keep them at arm's length. You give gifts but check your own for poison. You live each day as if walking across a tightrope strung high above the marble courtyards, knowing a single misstep could mean a fall from which you will never recover. Because in the harem, rivalry is not an exception, it is the rule, and the women who survive it are the ones who learn to wield it. Sometimes like a dagger, sometimes like a shield, always with the grace of dancers and the cunning of queens. By now, you've seen how rivalry can twist friendships into daggers, how laughter can turn into poison, and how one glance from the sultan can shift the balance of the entire palace. But there is one change in status that transforms the game more than any other: motherhood. The moment a concubine bears a child, especially a son, her entire world changes. She is no longer simply a plaything or a companion. She becomes a mother of princes, a woman whose future is now inseparably tied to the succession of the Ottoman throne. When a child is born in the harem, the palace quivers like the surface of a pool struck by a stone. Eunuchs run through the corridors, carrying messages. The Valide Sultan is informed immediately. Physicians and midwives bustle around the chambers, their hands red from the effort of delivery. Candles burn brighter in celebration, and the mother herself, once just another woman among dozens, now becomes a figure of immense importance. The Ottomans had a phrase for this transformation: mother of a Shahzadeh. The title alone was enough to elevate a woman far above her peers. She now had quarters of her own, attendants dedicated to her, and an income from the palace treasury to support her household. Other concubines bowed to her, for she carried in her arms not just a child, but a piece of the empire's future. But the gift came with a curse. Ottoman succession was brutal. Unlike in Europe, where crowns often passed by primogeniture, the Ottomans followed a far harsher principle: survival of the strongest. Any son of the sultan could become the next ruler, which meant that when one ascended, his brothers were often executed to prevent civil war. Imagine it. Your beloved baby boy, so small and perfect in your arms, is born into a world where his survival may one day require the death of his brothers. And those brothers' mothers, once your friends or rivals, will never forget the threat your child represents. This reality turned the harem into a silent battlefield of mothers. Every lullaby sung at night carried the undertone of fear. Every toy, every lesson, every blessing whispered over a boy's head was also a shield against a possible executioner's bowstring. The harem might have been filled with music and silk, but beneath it pulsed the knowledge that your child's survival meant another's death. Mothers of princes quickly became some of the most politically active women in the palace. They maneuvered to secure the best tutors, the best physicians, the most loyal attendants for their sons. They lobbied the Valide Sultan to recognize their child's promise. They bribed eunuchs and officials to whisper their boy's virtues in the sultan's ear. Even the arrangement of apartments mattered. Proximity to the sultan's chambers could mean more frequent visits for your child and more chances for him to leave an impression. Let's pause for a modern comparison. It's like being backstage at the world's most competitive talent show, except the contestants are toddlers, and the stakes are life or death. Every mother is a stage mom, every tutor is a coach, and the judge is not Simon Cowell, but the man who commands the largest army in the world. Welcome to Ottoman parenthood, and this fierce maternal ambition produced some of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Take Harem Sultan again. Her real strength didn't come only from her marriage to Suleiman. It came from her children. By bearing multiple sons, she ensured her lineage had more than one chance to reach the throne. When Mustafa, son of Mahadevran, stood as the strongest candidate, Harem feared for her son's survival, so she plotted, whispered, and schemed until Mustafa was gone, clearing the path for her own. Without her role as mother, she could never have wielded such power. Or consider Concubines Sultan, who bore several sons and later became regent for two of them. Her maternal status gave her not only survival, but authority. She was not merely the sultan's companion, she was the mother of sultans. From that position she could act as guardian, advisor, and even ruler in her own right. Daily life for mothers of princes was different from other concubines. Their mornings were filled not with embroidery or music lessons, but with overseeing their sons' education. They watched as tutors drilled the boys in reading the Quran, in calligraphy, in horseback riding, and in military drills. The mothers stood in the background, correcting posture, encouraging effort, rewarding success with sweetmeats. Their sons' achievements were their own, their sons' failures their shame. The rivalry between mothers could be sharpest at these lessons. Imagine two princes practicing archery side by side. One strikes the target cleanly, the other misses. Their mothers exchange polite smiles, but behind their eyes burn triumph and resentment. Later, the gossip spreads. Did you see? Her son shoots like a peasant. A small failure could ripple outward, weakening a boy's reputation, and by extension, his mother's standing. Feasts, too, were arenas. When princes were brought to gatherings, their mothers dressed them in the finest silks, their little turbans set with tiny jewels. The boys recited verses, sang songs, displayed their learning. Applause meant hope. Silence meant doom. And through it all, the mothers watched each other like hawks, noting which child was praised, which one ignored. But motherhood in the harem was not only about ambition, it was also about genuine aching love. Imagine holding your son as he sleeps, his small hand curled around your finger, and knowing the dangers he faces. You pray over him, burn incense in his room, slip amulets under his pillow, anything to protect him. You whisper into his ear not just words of comfort, but lessons of survival. Be loyal, be watchful, trust no one too quickly, because you know one day he will not just be a boy, he will be a contender for the throne, and the price of losing is death. And yes, sometimes those fears came true. Countless mothers lived to see their sons executed in the struggle for succession. Imagine the grief of Mahidevran when her son Mustafa, beloved by the people, was strangled by his father's order. Imagine the wailing in her chambers, the bitter cries of a woman who had lost not only her child but her status, her purpose, her very reason to live. She was sent into obscurity, her once bright star extinguished. On the other hand, imagine the triumph of Harem when her son Selim took the throne, securing her legacy forever, or Kosem, guiding her sons to rule, then her grandsons, extending her influence across generations. In those moments, the harem's rivalries bore fruit, not just for the women, but for the entire empire. The mother's influence extended beyond the palace walls. They wrote letters to governors, to foreign rulers, to viziers. They arranged marriages for their daughters, creating webs of alliance. They funded mosques and soup kitchens in their sons' names, building reputations of piety and generosity that bolstered their claims. Every move was calculated to strengthen their child's place in the empire's future, and yet, behind all the ambition, there was tenderness. Women sang lullabies in dozens of languages: Turkish, Greek, Bosnian, Circassian, songs of homes they would never see again, now gifted to their children as a kind of inheritance. They told stories from their childhoods, teaching their sons not only Ottoman grandeur, but also the memory of other lands, other cultures. The harem was a melting pot, and the children carried its mixed heritage in their blood. When you walk through the harem in your imagination, past the courtyards where boys once played, you can almost hear their laughter echoing off the stone. You can almost see their mothers watching from the windows, their faces half hidden by latticed screens, pride and fear mingling in their eyes. To be a mother in the harem was to live constantly in the shadow of love and loss. You gave everything to your son, your body, your ambition, your prayers, knowing that one day it might not be enough. Yet you tried, always, because motherhood was not optional. It was the sharpest weapon the harem gave you, and the softest. So you hold your son tighter at night, whispering promises into his hair, even as you glance toward the other chambers where rival mothers do the same. You know that in this palace where concubines become queens, motherhood is both the crown and the cross you must bear. By now you understand that once a concubine became the mother of a prince, her life and the life of her son was consumed with politics. But in this world of rivalry, silk and whispers, there was always one woman standing higher than them all, the Valide Sultan. If the Bashkadin was queen of the harem, the Valide was empress. Her power stretched across the entire palace. Her influence reached into the Divan, the Council of State, and her word could rival that of Grand Viziers. To cross her was to invite ruin, to please her was to survive. The title of Valide Sultan was given to the mother of the reigning sultan. Unlike concubines or even legal wives, The Valide authority did not depend on beauty, charm, or favor. It came from blood. She had given birth to the Sultan himself. That bond, the eternal tie between mother and son, placed her above everyone else in the harem, and in many ways above nearly everyone in the empire. When a prince ascended to the throne, his mother immediately became the most powerful woman alive in Ottoman lands. She moved into the largest and most luxurious apartments in Topkapi Palace, known as the Valide Sultans' quarters. These rooms were a palace within a palace, high vaulted ceilings, latticed windows overlooking the Bosporus, gilded furniture, and attendants numbering in the dozens. While other women might dream of being favourites or cadins, only one could ever become Valide, and once she did, her authority was unmatched. The Valide controlled the harem's hierarchy. She decided which concubines were promoted, which were dismissed, and which were allowed near her son. She supervised the eunuchs, who guarded the harem and acted as her informants. She managed the enormous budget of the harem, allocating funds for clothing, food, servants, and luxuries. Even the Bashkardun, powerful as she was, bowed before the Valide. But her power did not stop at the harem walls. The Valide had a voice in state affairs, often advising her son on politics, diplomacy, and appointments. Some sultans relied heavily on their mothers, consulting them on military campaigns or court intrigues. Ambassadors knew this well, and many wrote in their reports that the mother of the sultan governs all. They brought gifts not only for the ruler, but for his mother. Knowing her favour could unlock doors that official petitions could not. Picture the scene. A Grand Vizier kneels before the Sultan, presenting advice on foreign policy. The Sultan listens but remains silent. Later that evening, in the quiet of the Valide's chambers, he discusses the matter with his mother. She weighs the options, recalling years of court intrigue she has survived, and offers her perspective. Her voice may be soft, but it carries the weight of survival, of experience, of maternal authority. In the end, her counsel often sways his decision more than any vizier's speech. The Valide also played a crucial role in succession politics. Remember, when a new sultan took the throne, his brothers were at risk. The Valide fought fiercely to protect her son's claim, sometimes even arranging the quiet execution of rivals. Once he was secure, her mission shifted to ensuring her grandchildren's survival. Every choice she made was filtered through this lens, preserve the dynasty through her bloodline. One of the most famous examples is Concubines Sultan. Born Anastasia in Greece, she entered the harem as a concubine, rose to become favourite of Sultan Ahmed I, and bore several children. When her son Murad I ascended the throne as a child, she became Valide Sultan and acted as regent, ruling in his name. She repeated this role for her other sons, and later even for her grandson. For decades she was the power behind the throne, signing decrees, meeting ambassadors, and managing the empire. Her reign showed just how dominant a Valide could be. Yet power came with peril. Kozum's life ended violently when her daughter-in-law, Turhan Sultan, plotted her death. Strangled by silk cords in the harem itself, Kozum proved that even the Valide was not invincible. Rivalries within the palace could strike down even the most formidable woman. Still, the Valide authority was not always built on ruthlessness. Many used their power for charitable works, building mosques, schools, hospitals, and fountains. Their names remain etched into Istanbul's skyline. The Yeni Mosque, commissioned by Valide Turhan. The Atik Valide Mosque, built by Nurbanu Sultan. These architectural legacies were not only acts of piety, but also statements of authority. By inscribing their presence in stone, the Valides ensured they would never be forgotten. Day to day, life as Valide meant constant vigilance. You woke surrounded by attendants, eunuchs reporting on the latest whispers. You received gifts from viziers, petitions from governors, letters from foreign rulers. You oversaw the training of new concubines, approving which might one day be sent to your son. Meals were presented with ceremony, each dish tasted for poison before it reached your lips. Even in luxury, danger hovered. And yet, for many women, becoming Valide was the ultimate triumph. It was proof that you had navigated the treacherous labyrinth of the harem, survived rivals, borne a son, and seen him ascend the throne. Few could dream of such a pinnacle. For the hundreds of women who entered the harem, only one at a time could hold that crown. Here's a lighter aside. Think of the Valide as the ultimate momager, except instead of negotiating modelling contracts, she managed armies, viziers, and international treaties. Kris Jenner could only dream. Her relationship with the Bashkardin was delicate. In theory, the Valide outranked her completely. In practice, tensions often flared. The Bashkardin might try to influence the Sultan's heart, while the Valide controlled his environment. Sometimes they worked together, shaping the Sultan's decisions in harmony. Other times they clashed, each pulling him in different directions. The Sultan himself often became the rope in this tug of war, torn between lover and mother. Foreign ambassadors were fascinated by this power dynamic. Venetian and Habsburg envoys frequently wrote back to Europe, describing how the Sultan's mother could make or break treaties, elevate viziers, or even decide questions of war. European courts, used to Queen's consort wielding influence, were astonished to learn that in the Ottoman world, it was often the mother who reigned supreme. But perhaps the greatest weapon of the Valide Sultan was her invisibility. She rarely appeared in public. She did not stand in the council chamber, nor ride at the head of armies. Her power was exercised behind lattice screens, in whispered conversations, in letters sealed with her hand. This secrecy made her all the more formidable. No one could publicly oppose her, for she was never seen. Her authority was like gravity, silent, unseen, but inescapable. And so, as you walk through the harem in your imagination, you reach the grand apartments of the Valide. You feel the air grow heavier, the walls taller. This is the heart of the harem's power, where decisions that shape empires are made over cups of coffee and bowls of sherbet. Here sits the woman who bore the Sultan, who raised him, who now guides him. She is mother, advisor, ruler, and queen. All others bow before her. To be Valide Sultan is to stand at the summit of female power in the Ottoman world. But it is also to live surrounded by envy, fear, and danger. Your throne is cushioned with silk, but it rests above a pit of daggers. One misstep, one rival too bold, and you could fall. Yet while you reign, your word is law, your glance is command, and your name echoes not only through the palace but through the empire itself. So you bow low in your mind before her, the Valide Sultan, the mother of kings. For in this world where concubines became queens, she is the queen of queens. The harem was not only a stage of silk and whispers, it was also a place where shadows lengthened, where intrigues slipped into darker forms, where rivalry could turn into murder. By now you've seen how gifts and gossip could shape destinies, but the harem's most frightening weapons were invisible. Poison stirred into sherbet, powders slipped into cosmetics, herbs disguised as medicine. A woman's beauty could be destroyed overnight, her health ruined, her life ended, all without a blade drawn or a shout heard. The architecture of the harem itself lent itself to secrecy. Corridors twisted like serpents, doors opened into hidden chambers, servants carried trays from kitchens you never saw. Every meal, every drink, every ointment passed through countless hands before it reached you. How could you know which servant was loyal, which one bribed, which one whispered to your enemy in the night? You might stare at a silver bowl of candied fruits, wondering if the bright orange slices glistened from honey or from venom. Rumors of poisonings abounded. No one could ever prove most of them, of course, because the victims simply weakened, fell ill, and died. Fevers came easily in crowded palaces. Who could say if it was plague or powder? But whispers clung to certain deaths. She drank sherbet at the feast, some would murmur. Her rival sent her those figs, others insisted. A rash, a cough, a sudden collapse. It was enough to spark suspicion, and in the harem, suspicion was as deadly as poison itself. Cosmetics were another dangerous battleground. Women spent hours each day preparing their faces and bodies, applying creams, oils, and powders. A single alteration could cause disfigurement. A rival might slip lead-based powders into your kohl, blistering your eyelids. A paste might be laced with irritants, leaving your skin blotched and red just before a feast. Imagine the horror of appearing before the Sultan with a swollen face or blemished skin, your carefully cultivated beauty ruined. It was a silent assassination of reputation, no less effective than strangulation. Even perfumes could be treacherous. Musk, amber, and rose oils were treasured, but they could easily be adulterated. A vial of sweet-smelling oil might contain corrosive substances, leaving rashes wherever it touched. Women who once commanded attention could fade from favor simply by appearing less radiant, and no one would ever prove why. Medicine, too, could be turned. Concubines and princes alike relied on palace physicians for herbs, powders, and tonics, but those medicines passed through many hands before reaching the patient. Was that opium meant to soothe or to silence? Was the sleeping draught truly for rest, or was it meant to ensure you never woke again? In a palace where every life was political, illness was never just illness, and it wasn't only women who fell victim. Princes themselves were vulnerable. A boy showing too much promise might be quietly weakened, his mother helpless to protect him. A rival mother might whisper to physicians, bribe attendants, or slip herbs into food. If the child weakened, his claim to the throne dimmed, and if he died, suspicion rarely reached beyond the harem walls. But not all intrigues required poison. Sometimes whispers alone sufficed. A single rumor, repeated often enough, could tarnish a woman's reputation. She is ill, someone might say. She speaks too boldly. The Sultan no longer smiles at her. These small seeds grew into truths in the minds of others, and soon a woman found herself isolated, avoided, abandoned. The effect was as deadly as poison, invisibility. For in the harem, to be ignored was to vanish. One infamous case of intrigue comes from the reign of Ahmed II. His favorite, Valide Sultan, was targeted repeatedly by rivals who feared her influence. Whispers spread that she practiced sorcery, that she bewitched the Sultan with charms. Others accused her of plotting against other concubines. Valide survived, not by denying these rumors, but by mastering them, turning accusations into fuel for her own myth, until even the viziers feared her supposed powers. Another dark tale swirls around Safiye Sultan, favorite of Murad III and later Valide Sultan. Her rivals accused her of poisoning other consorts to maintain her supremacy. Whether true or not, the story stuck, creating an aura of danger around her. Some historians believe she used eunuchs to carry out quiet eliminations, ensuring her path remained clear. Fact or rumor, it hardly mattered. The fear she inspired was power in itself. Life in the harem became a constant act of vigilance. You learned never to eat what others offered, unless it came from trusted hands. You sniffed perfumes before applying them, dabbed ointments on your wrist before your face, tasted a drop of sherbet only after your servants sipped first. You kept your circle small, your confidants fewer still. You watched your rivals with polite smiles, while your mind catalogued every glance, every whispered conversation, every tray that passed too quickly through their hands. And here comes a modern aside. Imagine if your office break room snacks could kill you. If every latte might be poisoned by a jealous co-worker. If every perfume spritz could leave burns. Welcome to the world's most stressful workplace wellness program. But behind the paranoia was a simple truth. The stakes were survival. A woman who lost the Sultan's favor could be exiled to a provincial palace, forgotten forever. A woman who became too powerful might be strangled quietly with a silk cord, her body buried without ceremony. And for the mothers of princes, the danger extended to their children. They weren't just protecting themselves, they were protecting the future of their bloodline. Some women turned to religion for protection. They wore amulets inscribed with Quranic verses, hung charms over their children's beds, whispered prayers into every cup and plate. They believed that piety could shield them where guards could not. Others trusted only in alliances, making pacts with eunuchs, viziers, or even foreign ambassadors to secure their safety. And sometimes, sheer luck determined survival. A servant loyal to you might taste a poisoned dish first and fall, saving you. A rival's plot might be discovered at the last moment, her bribes exposed. The line between life and death was razor thin, and often invisible. The fear of intrigue created its own atmosphere. Women grew skilled at hiding emotions, at laughing when they wanted to cry, at thanking someone while suspecting betrayal. Friendships became transactional, kindnesses carefully calculated, even joy was cautious. If you celebrated too loudly, others might take it as provocation. Yet, in this dangerous dance, some women thrived. They learned to wield whispers like daggers, to plant rumors that grew like weeds in a rival's path. They turned suspicion into strategy, so that every collapse, every exile, every sudden death seemed like coincidence while they remained untouched. These women were the true mistresses of intrigue, queens not only of beauty but of shadows. Walking through Topkapi Palace today, tourists see the tiled walls, the gilded doors, the soft light filtering through stained glass. It looks serene, almost holy, but if you pause in the quiet, you can almost hear it, the echo of whispers, the faint clink of cups, the hush of footsteps carrying secrets. The beauty hides the danger, as it always did. For in the harem, silk and poison, laughter and fear, kisses and daggers were never far apart. Intrigue was not an exception. It was the bloodstream of the palace, and every woman who survived learned to taste her food slowly, to smile carefully, and to listen always for the footsteps behind her. When rivalry sharpened into daggers and whispers into poison, some concubines discovered a softer weapon that could shield them: public image. The harem might have been hidden behind lattice screens and marble gates, but its power spilled into the streets of Istanbul, into the mosques, the markets, even the humblest of kitchens. And for ambitious women, one of the safest ways to secure survival was to step beyond the palace walls, not physically, but symbolically through acts of charity and patronage. You see, the Ottoman world revered generosity. To feed the poor, to build fountains, to sponsor schools, these were considered acts of deep piety, acts that brought baraka, divine blessing, not only to the donor but to the entire dynasty. A woman who invested in such works wasn't just currying favor with the people, she was binding her name to the empire's spiritual fabric, and that kind of legitimacy was harder for rivals to attack. Take, for example, Harem Sultan. We've already seen how she rose from captive to queen, but part of her genius lay in how she crafted her public image. She knew whispers in the harem could tarnish her reputation, so she reached outside. She commissioned the Haseki Harem Sultan complex in Istanbul, an enormous charitable foundation that included a mosque, a school, a hospital, and a soup kitchen. Thousands ate from her kitchens daily, their hunger soothed by the generosity of the Sultana. For them, Harem was not a schemer in silks. She was a mother of the poor, a woman of mercy. The act carried more than spiritual weight. Imagine being a poor widow in Istanbul, walking to the soup kitchen and receiving bread stamped with the Sultana's emblem. When your stomach fills, whose name do you bless? Harem's. And when gossip spreads that she poisoned rivals or whispered lies about princes, do you believe it? Or do you remember the warm bread in your hands, the shelter she built for you? Charity built a shield stronger than marble walls. She was not alone. Nurbanu Sultan, mother of Muradad III, funded the Attic Valide Mosque in Üsküdar, a sprawling complex with a hospital and hospice. Safiye Sultan, her successor, sponsored the Yeni Mosque in Eminönü, though it was completed only decades later by Turhan Sultan. Kazem Sultan, one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history, sponsored fountains, caravanserais and schools. These projects were not just gifts, they were statements. They said, "We are not hidden. We shape the empire you live in. Our hands feed you, our water quenches you, our buildings shelter you." The scale of these endowments was staggering. In Ottoman law, a vakif charitable foundation ensured that the revenues from properties, shops, farms, markets were dedicated to funding these institutions forever. So when a Valide Sultan endowed a mosque, she wasn't just offering a one-time gift. She was creating a permanent source of piety and prestige. Her name etched into legal documents, her reputation preserved for centuries. Walk through Istanbul today, and you still see their legacies rising above the skyline. Centuries after their deaths, public image extended into diplomacy as well. Concubines and Valide Sultans often corresponded with foreign rulers, sending gifts of textiles, perfumes, and jewels. Harem Sultan exchanged letters with Sigismund II of Poland, even writing in her own name. European ambassadors marveled at receiving silken handkerchiefs or embroidered garments sent by women they had never seen. To them, the harem was no longer a hidden chamber, it was a political actor. These gestures had a domestic effect too. When rivals whispered against you in the palace, you could point to your charitable works as proof of your virtue. Would a woman who built mosques poison her sisters? The eunuchs might ask. Would the mother of the poor scheme against her kin? Of course the answer could still be yes, but the weight of public perception tilted in your favour. Public ceremonies reinforced this image. During festivals, food was distributed in the Sultan's names. During Ramadan, kitchens opened to serve evening meals. Women of the harem were invisible in person, but present in symbol through the bread, the water, the light of lamps burning in mosques. They funded. The people of Istanbul learned to bless their names, even if they never glimpsed their faces. Let's slip in a lighter aside. Imagine being accused of office sabotage, but then pointing out that you've just bought lunch for the entire company for the next decade. Hard to fire you when everyone's still chewing your free kebabs. The architectural legacy of these women cannot be overstated. Walk through the Atik Valide Mosque today, and you feel Nurbanu Sultan's presence. The graceful arches, the calligraphy on the walls, the hum of prayers, they are as much her creation as the architect's in Eminene. The Yeni Mosque dominates the skyline, a monument to Safiye's vision and Turhan's completion. Even in Jerusalem you find Harem's imprint in the soup kitchens that once fed thousands daily. For the women themselves, these projects were also a way to exert control. Inside the harem, power was fragile, subject to the whims of the sultan and the daggers of rivals. But a mosque, once built, could not be unbuilt. A vakif, once endowed, lived on beyond intrigue. Even if a woman fell from favour, her works endured, her name recited in prayers by generations unborn. In a world where life was precarious, charity created permanence, and charity was not limited to the great Valide Sultans. Even lower-ranking women tried to build their reputations through smaller acts, distributing coins to the poor, sponsoring Quran recitations, arranging marriages for orphans. Each gesture added a thread to the tapestry of their image, weaving them into the social memory of the empire. But make no mistake, charity was political. When Kosum Sultan endowed fountains in Istanbul, she was not only providing water, she was refreshing loyalty. When Turhan Sultan completed the Yeni Mosque, she was not merely raising domes, she was raising her own legitimacy against rivals who doubted her. Every stone was both prayer and propaganda. Foreign visitors noticed. European travellers often remarked with awe that the women of the Ottoman harem, though unseen, left such visible legacies. In a world where queens consort built palaces and churches, the Ottoman sultanas rivaled them with mosques and complexes of equal grandeur. Some even surpassed them. It was said that while kings ruled with swords, the Valide Sultans ruled with foundations. Inside the harem, these projects also shifted dynamics. A concubine who funded a mosque could not be dismissed as easily as one who merely entertained the sultan. Her prestige gave her a shield. Rivals hesitated before whispering against her, knowing her name carried weight not only in the palace, but in the streets of Istanbul. Eunuchs treated her with greater deference, aware that she had influence far beyond the harem gates. Even after death, the public image of these women remained potent. Their tombs became places of respect, their names invoked in sermons. In a sense, charity was the one form of immortality available to them. While rivals faded into obscurity, their names preserved only in dusty registers. The builders of mosques and soup kitchens lived on in stone, in marble, in the daily lives of the people they had served. So you walk through Istanbul in your imagination, past the domes and minarets. Every time you pass a fountain carved with a sultana's emblem, you hear her whisper, "I fed you, I clothed you, I sheltered you. Remember me." And you realize that in the harem, charity was not simply kindness. It was strategy, survival, and legacy, all at once. Because when concubines became queens, they didn't only wield power in silk corridors, they etched their names into the city itself, leaving monuments of mercy that outlasted intrigue, poisoning, and even death. By now you've seen how rivalry, motherhood, and charity shaped the inner life of the harem. But to stop there would be to underestimate these women. They were not confined to embroidery frames and baths. Their influence spilled over into the affairs of state. Behind the latticed windows of Topkapi, policy was bent. Alliances were forged, and appointments were made, not only by the Sultan and his viziers, but by the women who shared his chambers and carried his sons. At first glance, this seems impossible. Ottoman tradition claimed that the harem was separate from politics. The Sultan ruled, the viziers advised, the janissaries marched, and the women were to remain behind curtains. But power doesn't obey architecture. Where the Sultan slept, where he confided his troubles, where he whispered his doubts, that was where politics inevitably followed. And the women of the harem learned how to make their voices matter. Consider the smallest gesture, a word spoken at night. A concubine, lying beside the Sultan, could gently suggest that one vizier was more loyal than another, that one governor was mistreating the people, that one ambassador brought better gifts. The Sultan, perhaps half asleep, perhaps more relaxed than in council, might absorb these words more deeply than he did the long speeches of his viziers. A sigh, a question, even a frown from his beloved could ripple outward into the empire's policies. This was the subtlety of influence. Women rarely issued direct commands. Instead, they shaped moods, framed decisions, steered conversations. They could praise a governor in a letter, recommend a loyal servant for promotion, or raise doubts about an enemy's loyalty. And because these interventions came from women whom the Sultan trusted most, they often carried more weight than formal petitions. The practice was not unique to one woman. Harem Sultan corresponded with foreign rulers, most notably King Sigismund II of Poland. Her letters, preserved in archives, reveal her as a diplomat in her own right, negotiating peace, requesting the safety of merchants, and smoothing relations between states. For European rulers, it was astonishing here. Was a woman unseen and officially excluded from politics, speaking with the authority of the empire itself. Concubines Sultan took this influence further. As Valide Sultan, she didn't merely whisper suggestions. She acted openly, issuing orders in her son's name, signing decrees, and meeting ambassadors. She became the de facto ruler of the empire during the minority of Murad IV and later again for Mehmed IV. Her apartments became a secondary court, where officials came to seek favor or deliver petitions. The walls of the harem did not restrain her, they amplified her power. But even concubines who never became Valide found ways to influence policy. Through marriages arranged for their daughters, they tied themselves to the empire's most powerful families. Rustem Pasha, one of the most influential Grand Viziers, married Mirama Sultan, daughter of Harem, and Suleiman. That alliance bound the vizier to the Sultana's faction, strengthening her hand against rivals. Marriage alliances extended even to Europe. Concubines negotiated the marriages of their daughters to foreign princes or to Ottoman governors, weaving networks that stretched across borders. Each union brought influence, loyalty, and sometimes foreign policy leverage. In this way, women inside the harem reached far beyond its marble walls, shaping the empire's relationships with Venice, Poland, Austria, and Persia. Let's pause for a lighter aside. If the Sultan's council chamber was the empire's official parliament, the harem was the after-hours lobby, the place where policy was quietly rewritten while everyone else thought the meeting had ended, and their reach extended beyond individuals. The harem women often influenced broad policies. Harem Sultan encouraged Suleiman's focus on the Eastern Front, particularly against Persia, while her daughter Miharama supported campaigns in Hungary. Concubines Sultan guided her sons towards centralization, trying to keep the Janissaries in check. Turhan Sultan later involved herself in naval policies, supporting the construction of fortresses along the Dardanelles to resist Venetian fleets. Finances were another arena. The Valide Sultan controlled the immense revenues of the harem, drawn from estates, markets, and taxes. These funds could be used for charity, but also for politics. A timely donation to the Janissaries, a generous gift to a vizier, a shipment of grain to the people. These were political acts as much as pious ones. The Valide's treasury became a secondary source of state funding, allowing her to intervene directly in crises. Consider the Janissary revolts. At several moments in Ottoman history when soldiers rioted over pay or conditions, it was the Valide Sultan who calmed them. She sent out coins from her treasury, distributed food, or simply appeared at the window to reassure them. The soldiers, who rarely saw the Sultan's mother, were awed by her intervention. In their eyes, she was not only a mother of the Sultan but a mother of the empire. Diplomacy also flowed through the harem in unexpected ways. European ambassadors sometimes sent gifts directly to the Valide Sultan or to powerful consorts, knowing that their petitions would be carried to the Sultan more effectively than through official channels. These gifts included jewels, rare fabrics, mechanical clocks, and even exotic animals. A jeweled mirror sent to a favorite concubine could secure trade concessions. A clever gift to the Valide might sway the Sultan toward peace rather than war. And don't underestimate the role of letters. While the Sultan's scribes handled official correspondence, the harem women wrote their own, often in elegant calligraphy. These letters survive in archives, revealing women negotiating ransoms, securing safe passage for merchants, and arranging diplomatic marriages. Their voices, though hidden in life, echo through history in ink and parchment. Sometimes the influence was more direct still. During the Sultanate of Women, roughly 1530s, 1650s, several Valide sultans acted as regents for child rulers. They didn't just advise, they ruled. They received ambassadors, issued orders, and signed decrees with their own seals. Kozum Sultan and Turhan Sultan are the clearest examples, but even earlier women, like Nurbanu, wielded extraordinary influence over policy. These moments reshaped the empire. Decisions about war and peace, about taxes and trade, about executions and appointments, many of them passed through the harem. Some historians argue that this was a sign of Ottoman decline, that women weakened the empire by interfering, but a more honest reading shows that these women stabilized the empire at times when child sultans or weak rulers might have left it vulnerable. They were not distractions, they were anchors. Daily life in the harem reflected this political role. Eunuchs carried messages not only within the palace, but across the city. Courtiers slipped into the Valide chambers with petitions. Viziers sought audiences with women, disguised as visits to present gifts. Behind the silks and songs, the harem was a second council, operating in shadows but shaping the light. And here's the part that always makes modern listeners smile. For all the drama of poisonings and rivalries, sometimes the fate of empires really did turn on something as simple as a bedtime conversation. Imagine Suleiman, weary from council, lying beside Harem. She laughs, strokes his hair, and says, "That vizier seems untrustworthy." He nods, half asleep, and the next week that vizier is dismissed. History pivots not with swords but with whispers in the dark. The women knew it too. They cultivated this intimacy, this quiet access. They understood that the council chamber was full of men with loud voices and heavy robes, but the harem was where the Sultan's heart softened, where his guard dropped, where his decisions were shaped in silence. That was their arena, and they ruled it with skill. So the next time you imagine Ottoman politics, don't picture only the divan with its stern viziers, or the battlefield with its armoured janissaries. Picture also the tiled chambers of Topkapi, the cushions, the low lamps, the gentle laughter. Picture a woman leaning close, her voice soft, her words carefully chosen. For in that moment, she might be deciding the fate of provinces, armies, even entire wars. That is the true secret of the harem. Behind the curtains, beyond the silks, these women turned intimacy into influence, affection into authority, whispers into policy. You followed the quiet intrigues of the harem, the whispers of mothers, the iron grip of the Valide, and the charitable works that carved women's names into stone. But here's the truth. For a handful of concubines, the line between being a consort and being a queen blurred so thoroughly that contemporaries called them rulers in all but name. They were not crowned with diadems like European queens, nor did they sit on thrones before cheering crowds. Instead, their throne was a cushioned chamber in Topkapi, their crown a veil and a seal, their authority exercised through sons, viziers, and shadows. Let's step into their world. When a concubine bore a prince who ascended the throne, her title transformed into Valide Sultan. At this point, she didn't simply influence politics, she orchestrated them. But even before reaching that pinnacle, several women effectively wielded the authority of queens. They negotiated treaties, directed armies by proxy, commanded immense wealth, and decided who lived and who died within the palace walls. European observers were astonished. In their reports, Venetian bailli and French ambassadors often wrote of the Sultan's queen, or the Empress of the Harem, even though no such official title existed in Ottoman law. To the outside world, these women looked and acted like monarchs, regardless of what the Ottomans called them. Take Harem Sultan again, because she truly redefined the role. Once Suleiman married her, she enjoyed privileges unheard of for a concubine. She had her own seal, meaning she could authenticate documents. She wrote directly to foreign rulers in her own name. She advised Suleiman on matters of governance and succession. She was, in every way, a queen consort, even though the Ottomans technically insisted sultans had no wives. Her daughter, Valide Sultan, though not a concubine but a princess, also carried extraordinary power. Married to Rustam Pasha, the Grand Vizier, she became a linchpin between the harem and the council chamber. Foreigners referred to her as the most powerful woman in the empire. When she sent letters to rulers in Europe, they were taken as seriously as the sultan's own commands. In this sense, she functioned as a queen in diplomacy. Then came Concubines Sultan, perhaps the clearest example of a concubine who became a queen without crown or ceremony. As consort of Ahmed III and later mother of Murad V and Ibrahim, she held power across multiple reigns. When her sons were too young to rule, she acted as regent, receiving ambassadors, issuing orders, even signing decrees with her own seal. For decades, she directed the empire's policies from behind screens. She was addressed by envoys as the Mother Empress, treated with the same deference given to monarchs. Concubines' apartments became a court within a court. Viziers visited her for counsel. Janissaries looked to her for pay and guidance. When food shortages struck, she distributed grain. When soldiers mutinied, she calmed them with coins from her treasury. She even arranged marriages between her daughters and key officials, tying the empire's power structure to her own family. What else is this but queenship, even if cloaked in another name? And yet, her story also shows the peril of wielding such authority. By the 1650s, her influence threatened her daughter-in-law Turhan Sultan, mother of Mehmed I. Their rivalry turned deadly. One night in 1651, Concubines was strangled with silk cords in her own chambers, murdered by Turhan's allies. The empire shuddered. A woman who had ruled for decades, who had been as powerful as any monarch, died not with ceremony but in silence. Even queens without crowns could bleed. Turhan Sultan herself inherited that mantle of shadowed queenship. As Valide of Mehmed I, she became the effective ruler, especially after ousting Concubines. She finished the Great Yeni Mosque in Istanbul, a project abandoned by her predecessors, and used it as a symbol of her triumph. She involved herself in naval policy, commissioning fortresses along the Dardanelles to block Venetian fleets. Ambassadors recorded their astonishment that the empire's foreign and military policies were shaped by a woman hidden behind veils. To them, she was no less a queen than Catherine de' Medici or Elizabeth I. But even outside the Sultanate of Women period, individual consorts acted with queenly authority. Safia Sultan, consort of Murad III and Valide of Mehmed III, maintained correspondence with Queen Elizabeth I of England. Imagine that, two of the most powerful women in the world writing to each other directly, gifts of silks and jewels exchanged across continents. Safia even received mechanical clocks and portraits from Elizabeth, tokens of mutual recognition between monarchs. Could there be clearer proof that the women of the harem were regarded as queens by their peers abroad? What distinguished these women was not only their proximity to the sultan, but their control of wealth. Each commanded vast estates and vakifs, bringing in revenues from shops, farms, and markets across the empire. These funds allowed them to act independently of the treasury, financing their own projects and influencing state decisions. A Valide Sultan with full coffers was a formidable force. She could calm soldiers, reward loyalists, and bribe enemies into silence. The daily exercise of queenly power often looked mundane, but was deeply political. A consort might recommend a new chamberlain. A Valide might appoint a trusted eunuch to supervise the palace gates. A princess might write to a governor, requesting leniency for a town. Each of these acts seemed small, but together they formed a web of governance. And because these women were unseen by the public, their influence carried an air of mystery. Outsiders imagined them as sorceresses or enchantresses, bending sultans with spells. The reality was more subtle: experience, intelligence, and an intimate understanding of power. Inside the harem, their queenly status was clear. They had attendants numbering in the dozens, their rooms filled with gilded furniture, jeweled fountains, and silken cushions. They held audiences with ambassadors, albeit behind lattices. Their decrees carried seals, their words carried the weight of law. They were served like monarchs, deferred to like monarchs, and feared like monarchs, but they also faced dangers unique to their position. Unlike crowned queens in Europe, their authority had no legal protection. It depended on the survival of their sons, on the continuance of the dynasty, on the sultan's favour. A single illness could undo them. A single rival could end them with silk cords in the night. Their power was immense, but fragile. A crown that weighed heavily yet could vanish in an instant. And here's where a little modern aside fits in. Imagine running a company as its CEO, making all the decisions, handling all the budgets, signing all the contracts, and yet, legally, your name isn't even on the paperwork. That was the life of these queenly concubines. Authority without official recognition, power without protection. Still, their impact is undeniable. They shaped the empire's architecture, diplomacy, finances, and politics for nearly 2 centuries. Their names endure not in chronicles of battles, but in mosques that still rise over Istanbul, in letters preserved in archives, in the very survival of the Ottoman dynasty through turbulent times. To walk through Topkapi today is to walk through their legacy. The tiled halls whisper of Harem's laughter, Kosem's commands, Turhan's triumph. The mosques of Üsküdar and Eminönü stand as stone witnesses to their queenly authority. The fountains still flowing with water in Istanbul's streets carry their names. They were queens, even if never crowned, rulers even if never declared. So when you imagine the harem, don't picture only silks and shadows. Picture also the invisible thrones, the women who sat upon them, and the empire that bent to their will. For in truth, concubines did not merely become companions, they became queens in all but name. By the mid-16th century, the influence of the harem had become impossible to deny. What began with the rise of Harem Sultan then deepened through the maneuverings of Nurbanu, Safiye, and Kosum, hardened into an era that historians now call the Sultanate of Women. For nearly a century and a half, from roughly the 1530s to the late 1600s, the Ottoman Empire was effectively shaped, steered, and at times outright ruled by the mothers and consorts of its sultans. It wasn't a conspiracy, it wasn't sorcery or seduction, despite what gossiping Venetian ambassadors whispered back to Europe. It was structure, necessity, and opportunity. When sultans were young, distracted, or disinterested, their mothers and favourite women stepped in to steady the empire, and once they tasted authority, they wielded it with skill, caution, and sometimes ruthless brilliance. Why did this happen? Several forces converged. First, the shift in royal marriage policy. Sultans no longer married foreign princesses. Instead, their children were born of concubines. That meant the women who bore princes, who lived in the harem, were the ones tied most directly to succession. Her concubine's status rose in direct proportion to her son's prospects. Second, the tradition of fratricide. When one prince inherited the throne, his brothers were often executed. This brutal custom made succession a game of survival. Each mother fought for her own son, weaving alliances, gathering influence, and sometimes whispering accusations against rivals. Third, the empire itself was vast, complex, and often under strain. Sultans like Suleiman were exceptional rulers, but his successors were not always so capable. Some ascended as children, Others preferred poetry or pleasures to politics. In those gaps, women stepped in. The early years, Harem and Mirima. The Sultanate of women began with Harem. By marrying Suleiman, she broke precedent and secured her seat beside him. Through her children, her correspondence, and her charitable foundations, she set the template. After her came her daughter, Valide Sultan, who played a crucial role in state politics through her marriage to Rustam Pasha, the Grand Vizier. Together, mother and daughter formed a political bloc, balancing the court against rivals and shaping succession in favor of Harem's sons. It was through them that the idea took hold. Women could be more than mothers. They could be players in the empire's destiny. Nurbanu Sultan and Safiye Sultan. The next phase came with Nurbanu, a Venetian woman who became consort of Selim II and mother of Murad III. When Murad ascended, Nurbanu became Valide Sultan. She wielded power not quietly, but openly, corresponding with Venice, directing appointments, and even influencing foreign policy. Venetian records reveal that their Senate often debated how to appeal to her, acknowledging her as a political force in her own right. After her came Safiye, Murad III's favourite and later valet of Mehmed III. Safiye extended the role of the harem even further. She corresponded with Queen Elizabeth I of England, exchanging gifts and letters. Imagine it, two women each ruling in her own sphere, communicating across borders like sovereigns. Safiye also began the construction of the Great Yani Mosque in Istanbul, though it would not be completed in her lifetime. Kosim Sultan, the pinnacle. And then came Kosim. Few women in history have wielded such sustained authority. As the concubine of Ahmed I, she bore several sons who later ascended the throne. When Murad III inherited as a child, Kosim acted as regent. She repeated this role for Ibrahim I and later for her grandson Mehmed I. Kosim wasn't just whispering in bedchambers. She sat in council, signed decrees, appointed officials, and met ambassadors. Her treasury rivaled that of the state. Soldiers, starving or unpaid, would turn not to the viziers, but to Kosim, who distributed coins from her coffers to calm revolts. Her apartments became an alternate center of power. Viziers and foreign envoys visited her directly, petitioning her favor. She was the empire's quiet monarch, her authority undeniable. To the people, she was not only Valide Sultan, but the mother of the world. And yet, her story ended in silken blood. By the 1650s, her power clashed with that of her daughter-in-law Turhan Sultan, mother of Mehmed I. Factions split the palace. Eunuchs chose sides. One night in 1651, Kosim was strangled with silk cords in her own chambers. The most powerful woman in Ottoman history died as she had lived, in the heart of intrigue. Turhan Sultan in the later years, Turhan Sultan, who ordered Kosim's death, then inherited her mantle as Valide Sultan. She wielded authority over Mehmed I's reign. She finally completed the Yeni Mosque, turning it into her own monument. She also oversaw the construction of fortresses along the Dardanelles, defending the empire against Venetian fleets. Turhan's regency solidified the model. The Sultan's mother was as much a ruler as the Sultan himself, especially when the throne was held by a child. How did it look to outsiders? To European ambassadors, the Sultanate of women was bewildering, used to seeing queens consort. They struggled to understand how women in a secluded harem could wield such power. Their reports drip with fascination and alarm. They wrote of the empress who rules unseen, of the hidden mother who decides our fates. They described meetings where gifts had to be sent, not to the viziers, but to the Valide. They watched as diplomatic outcomes shifted based on her opinion. For the Ottomans themselves, it was less scandalous and more practical. If the Sultan was a child, someone had to govern. If the dynasty's survival depended on a mother's vigilance, then it was only natural that she assumed authority. Daily life under the Sultanate of women. In practice, this meant that harem politics and state politics overlapped constantly. A vizier seeking promotion might court not only the Sultan, but also his mother. A governor hoping for leniency might send gifts to a princess. The janissaries, if unpaid, might riot. but Mon returned when the Valide distributed her own funds. Inside the harem, the atmosphere sharpened. To be the mother of a prince now meant not just survival, but possible regency. Rivalries grew fiercer. Factions hardened. Eunuchs divided their loyalties between potential heirs. The stakes rose, from silks and jewels to crowns and thrones. Yet in the midst of all this danger, there was also creativity. The Sultanate of Women left behind Istanbul's most iconic architecture: mosques, schools, fountains, bridges. It also produced a legacy of female correspondence, letters in elegant Ottoman calligraphy, preserved in archives. These letters, often signed by the Valide herself, show women commanding resources, negotiating with rulers, and shaping empire in ink as well as stone. The criticisms: not everyone approved. Some Ottoman chroniclers, writing later, blamed the Sultanate of Women for weakening the empire. They accused the Valides of corruption, favoritism, or distraction. They argued that viziers were undermined, soldiers neglected, because women pulled strings behind the scenes. But these criticisms often reveal more about gender expectations than actual governance. When sultans were strong, the empire thrived. When sultans were weak, the Valides stepped in. Far from destroying the empire, these women arguably kept it afloat during turbulent reigns. Without Kosum, without Turhan, without Harem, the Ottoman ship might have capsized far sooner. A modern aside, think of the Sultanate of Women like a corporate boardroom takeover. When the CEO, the Sultan, is absent, distracted, or underage, who steps in? The COO, the CFO, the people who actually understand the business. In the Ottoman case, those executives were the women of the harem. They weren't supposed to run the empire, but when they did, they often ran it better than the men. The end of the era. By the late 17th century, the Sultanate of Women waned. Stronger sultans reasserted authority. New administrative reforms reduced the Valides' independence, and the balance of power shifted back to viziers and soldiers. But the legacy remained. The mosques stood. The letters survived. The stories of rivalry and triumph echoed through chronicles, and the memory of women ruling from behind screens endured as one of the most extraordinary chapters in Ottoman history. So as you sit back, imagining the soft glow of lamps in Topkapi, the murmur of viziers waiting in the antechamber, the rustle of silk behind lattices, you know the truth. For over a century, the Ottoman Empire was ruled not only by sultans in turbans, but by women in veils. They were unseen, unnamed in official decrees, but their fingerprints shaped every policy, every succession, every treaty. The Sultanate of Women was not a deviation, it was an era, and in that era, concubines truly became queens. The story of the harem's queens does not end with the fall of the Sultanate of Women. Even as later sultans reasserted themselves, the legacies of these powerful women lingered like the scent of musk on marble walls. Their names were etched in stone, their rivalries remembered in chronicles, their whispers immortalized in the letters they sent beyond the palace. The harem had always been a paradox, both cage and throne, both prison and palace, and the women who navigated it left behind a legacy that reshaped not only Ottoman politics but the very image of female power in history. Let's step into that final legacy. The architectural crown. Walk through Istanbul today, and the women of the harem are still with you. Harem's mosque complex in the old city, her soup kitchen in Jerusalem, her fountains scattered like jewels across the empire. These remain as living testaments. Nurbanu's Atik Valide Mosque in Üsküdar rises with graceful arches, her name spoken in every call to prayer. Safiye and Turhan's Yeni Mosque dominates the Eminönü skyline, the stone declaration that women shaped this city as much as men. Kösem's caravanserais and fountains still whisper her name when travelers stop to drink. These works were not just pious offerings, they were political monuments, proof of authority. A concubine could be erased from palace records, her name blackened by rivals, but a mosque, a school, a hospital, these outlived intrigue. Generations of worshippers, students and travelers would recite prayers for their benefactors long after their deaths. In this way, the harem queens ensured immortality. Their rivals might strangle them with silk cords, but stone could not be strangled. Dynastic survival. The ultimate measure of these women's power lay in succession. Ottoman politics was never gentle. It demanded winners and erased losers, yet the line of sultans carried forward through the children of concubines. No foreign princess contributed to the bloodline after the mid-15th century. Every Ottoman sultan from Mehmed II onward was the son of a concubine. Without these women, there would have been no dynasty at all. Some mothers succeeded brilliantly. Harem placed her son Selim on the throne, ensuring her bloodline continued. Norbanu's son Murad III inherited, followed by her grandson Mehmed III. Kosem's sons and grandsons wore the crown, extending her influence across generations. These women became matriarchs, not only of the harem, but of the empire itself. Others suffered tragedy. Mahidevran's son Mustafa was executed, and she lived in obscurity, surviving but broken. Some mothers watched their sons die young, others saw them strangled by brothers. For them, queenship ended not in triumph, but in grief. Yet even their losses testify to the ferocity of the system. They fought for survival with the only weapon they had, their children. Cultural memory. Europe never stopped talking about the harem. Travelers, ambassadors, and merchants filled their reports with tales of powerful women. Some exaggerated, turning them into sorceresses or femme fatales. Others admired them, comparing them to queens consort in Europe. Plays, poems, and pamphlets spread across the continent, filled with both fascination and fear. To the Ottomans, the memory was more complex. Chroniclers often painted these women as dangerous middlers, blaming them for corruption or decline. Yet the architecture they left behind and the charities they founded were impossible to ignore. Even critics prayed in their mosques, drank from their fountains, and sent their children to their schools. The empire itself bore their imprint, whether or not historians approved, inside the palace walls. Even after the Sultanate of women waned, the harem remained a place of intrigue and influence. Later Valide Sultans might not have ruled as regents, but they still commanded respect. Their apartments remained the grandest, their treasuries vast. Concubines still dreamed of rising, still whispered in corridors, still bore sons whose lives meant everything. The daily rhythm of the harem continued. Novices trained in etiquette, odalisques performed songs, favorites waited for the eunuch's summons. Mothers still fought for their sons. Alliances still shifted like shadows. Gifts and gossip still decided fates. The system outlasted its most famous figures, carrying echoes of their stories into later centuries. And if you walked through those corridors in the 18th or 19th centuries, you would still feel it. The weight of history, the knowledge that once in these same rooms, women ruled an empire from behind screens. The double-edged crown. For all their triumphs, the harem queens lived precarious lives. Their power was immense, but fragile. They could command viziers one day and be strangled with silk cords the next. Their children could ascend the throne or be executed at dawn. Their legacies could be praised as pious or damned as corrupt. This double-edged crown shaped every decision. A woman could not simply bask in favor. She had to wield it carefully, cautiously, strategically. Too much ambition drew enemies. Too little ambition doomed her children. Balance was everything. And yet, even with all their caution, many for Kosem's murder, Mahidevran's obscurity, countless unnamed concubines buried in silence, all testify to the risks. But those who succeeded, Harem, Safiye, Nurbanu, Kosem, Turhan, proved that the harem could produce not only companions, but rulers. They wore no crowns, but they were queens, nonetheless. A modern aside, think of the Ottoman harem as the most exclusive, high-stakes political game in history. The players were women from across the world: Circassian, Greek, Albanian, Venetian, Ruthenian, brought together in one palace. Their tools were not armies or parliaments, but beauty, intelligence, wit, and children. Their prize was not only survival, but the chance to shape the destiny of an empire stretching across 3 continents. It was, in its own way, the ultimate reality show. Alliances formed and collapsed. Rivals rose and fell. Dramatic twists ended lives or crowned new queens. But unlike a TV show, the stakes were absolute. You could not walk away. You either won or you were erased. The legacy today. Walk again through Topkapi Palace, as visitors do now. You enter the harem's outer courts, past marble fountains and tiled corridors. You see the gilded doors, the latticed windows, the grand halls where favourites once danced. You sense the echoes of silk skirts swishing, the murmur of voices in a dozen languages, the soft laughter of women who dreamed of queenship. Each chamber tells a story. The apartments of the Valide Sultan whisper of Kosum's authority. The audience chamber hints at nights when ambassadors bowed before unseen women. The baths remember both luxury and whispers of sabotage. The courtyards recall the footsteps of children who would one day be sultans or victims of fratricide. The harem is no longer alive, but its spirit lingers. It is part of Istanbul's memory, part of world history, and the women who once ruled it, invisible to their contemporaries, now stand clearly in the chronicles of time. Closing reflection. The tale of the harem is not a story of passive beauty. It is a story of survival, ambition, and power. Concubines became rivals, rivals became mothers, mothers became valides, and valides became queens. They did not sit on thrones in public squares, but they ruled nonetheless, from shadows, from screens, from whispered words in the night. Their legacy is stone and silk, blood and memory. They reshaped the Ottoman Empire, turning concubinage into queenship, turning seclusion into sovereignty. And as you close your eyes now, you can almost hear their voices. Hürrem's laughter, Kosum's commands, Turhan's whispers. They remind you that power is not always visible, that queens do not always wear crowns, and that history often hides its most fascinating rulers behind veils. So let the palace grow quiet again. Imagine the lamps dimming, their flames soft and steady, casting golden halos against blue Iznik tiles. The corridors, once alive with whispers and footsteps, are now empty. The marble floors cool under the hush of night, the fountains murmuring softly like lullabies. The scent of rosewater fades, replaced by the still air of centuries gone. You settle into stillness, breathing slowly as the echoes of rivalry and ambition dissolve into silence. The women who once vied for power, who plotted and prayed, who dreamed and feared, now they rest in their tombs, their names etched into stone, their legacies carved into the city they helped shape. Their struggles are over. Their voices are whispers of history, softened by time. The rivalries that once seemed like storms are now only ripples on the surface of memory. And the palaces they once ruled, the mosques they once built, remain as gentle monuments rising peacefully against the sky. You breathe deeper, calmer, knowing that the story has carried you across centuries and continents, into chambers both dazzling and dangerous, and now it lays you back down gently, like silk upon a bed of cushions. Sleep now in that quiet. The queens of the harem will keep watch, not with daggers or poison, but with the serene weight of their legacy. Their whispers fade into the night, leaving only calm, only stillness, only rest. And when you wake, you will remember, even behind veils, even in silence, they were queens. Sweet dreams.